Friedrich Nietzsche, a fighter against his time. Preface. 6 years ago, when I became acquainted with the works of Friedrich Nietzsche, I had already developed ideas similar to his. Independently of him and through different paths, I arrived at views that align with what Nietzsche expressed in his writings. Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, On the Genealogy of Morality, and Twilight of the Idols. Already in my small book, Epistemology of the Goethean Worldview, published in 1886, the same spirit is expressed as in Nietzsche's aforementioned works. This is why I felt compelled to paint a picture of Nietzsche's intellectual and emotional life. I believe that such a picture will most closely resemble Nietzsche if it is created in accordance with his last mentioned writings. This is what I have done. Nietzsche's earlier writings show him as a seeker. In them, he presents himself as tirelessly striving upwards. In his later writings, we see him having reached a summit of a height appropriate to his unique spiritual nature. In most of the writings about Nietzsche published so far, his development is portrayed as if he held more or less divergent opinions at different times in his literary career. I have tried to show that there can be no talk of a change of opinion in Nietzsche, but only of an upward movement, of the natural development of a personality that had not yet found the appropriate form of expression for its views when it wrote its first works. The ultimate goal of Nietzsche's work is the depiction of the Superman type. To characterize this type, I have considered one of the main tasks of my writing. My image of the Superman has become the exact opposite of the distorted image created in the currently most widely read book about Nietzsche by Mrs. Lou Andreas Salome. Nothing more contrary to the Nietzschean spirit can be put into the world than the mystical monstrosity that Mrs. Salome has made of the Superman. My book shows that there is nowhere even the slightest trace of mysticism to be found in Nietzsche's ideas. I have not engaged in refuting Mrs. Salome's view that Nietzsche's thoughts in Human, All Too Human, were influenced by the elaborations of Paul Ray, the author of Psychological Observations and the Origin of Moral Sentiments, etc. A mind as mediocre as Paul Ray could not have made a significant impression on Nietzsche. I would not touch upon these things here either, if Mrs. Salome's book had not contributed so much to spreading truly repulsive views about Nietzsche. Fritz Kogel, the excellent editor of Nietzsche's works, gave this monstrosity its due in the Magazine für Literatur. I cannot conclude this short preface without heartily thanking Mrs. Förster Nietzsche, Nietzsche's sister, for the many kindnesses I have received from her during the time my work was being created. I owe the atmosphere from which the following thoughts were written to the hours spent in the Nietzsche archive in Naumburg, Weimar, April 1895. Rudolf Steiner, Nietzsche's works. For orientation, I list here Nietzsche's writings published so far and relevant to my elaborations, adding the year of publication of the first edition to each one. Or, Hellenism and Pessimism. The first edition appeared in 1872. A new edition, featuring a pre-printed attempt at self-criticism, was published in 1886, Untimely Meditations. First part, David Strauss, The Confessor and Writer, First ed., 1873. Second part, On the Use and Disadvantage of History for Life, First ed., 1874. Third part, Schopenhauer as Educator, First ed., 1874. Fourth part, Richard Wagner and Bayreuth, First ed., 1876. Human, All Too Human, A Book for Free Spirits, Volume 1, First ed., 1878. A new edition with an introductory preface appeared in 1886. Human, All Too Human, A Book for Free Spirits, Volume 2. The two sections of this book, Mixed Opinions and Maxims and The Wanderer and His Shadow, first appeared separately. The first in 1879 under the title Human, All Too Human, A Book for Free Spirits, Appendix, Mixed Opinions and Maxims, the second in 1880. Both sections were combined into one volume in 1886, which was provided with an introductory preface and bore the title Human, All Too Human, A Book for Free Spirits, second volume, new edition with an introductory preface. Dawn, Thoughts on Moral Prejudices, First ed., 1881, new edition with an introductory preface, 1887. The Gay Science, La Gaya Scienza, First ed., 1882, new edition with a preface, 1887. Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The parts first appeared individually. Part 1, 1883, Part 2, 1883, Part 3, 1884. The first complete edition of the three parts appeared in 1886. The fourth part appeared in 1885 in 40 copies only for friends, and only in 1891 as first ed. Beyond Good and Evil, Prelude to a Philosophy of the Future, first ed., 1886. On the Genealogy of Morality, a Polemic, first ed., 1887. The Case of Wagner, A Musician's Problem, first ed., 1888. Twilight of the Idols or How to Philosophize with a Hammer, first ed., 1889. Nietzsche contra Wagner, Files of a Psychologist, first appeared in the complete edition in 1895, already printed once in 1888 but not released. The Antichrist, Attempt at a Critique of Christianity, the first book of Nietzsche's unfinished work, The Will to Power, first printed in the complete edition, 1895. Poems, in the complete edition, 1895. A complete edition of Nietzsche's works in 8 volumes was published in 1895 by C.G. Naumann in Leipzig. It includes The Birth of Tragedy, 4th ed., The Untimely Meditations, 3rd ed., Human, All Too Human, Vols 1 and 4th ed., Dawn, 2nd ed., The Gay Science, 2nd ed., Zarathustra, 4th ed., Beyond Good and Evil, 5th ed., Genealogy of Morality, 4th ed., The Case of Wagner, 3rd ed., Twilight of the Idols, 3rd ed., Nietzsche contra Wagner, Antichrist, Poems. The publication of Nietzsche's as yet unpublished works, as well as his drafts, fragments, etc., is imminent. The character. 1. Friedrich Nietzsche characterizes himself as a solitary ponderer and friend of riddles, as an untimely personality. Whoever walks such solitary paths as he does, meets no one. That is what one's own paths entail. No one comes to help him. With everything that befalls him of danger, chance, malice, and bad weather, he must cope alone, he says in the preface to the 2nd edition of his Dawn. But it is fascinating to follow him into his solitude. The words he spoke about his relationship to Schopenhauer, I would like to say about my own to Nietzsche. I belong to those readers of Nietzsche who, after reading his first page, know with certainty that they will read all pages and listen to every word he has ever said. My trust in him was immediate. I understood him as if he had written for me, to express myself understandably, but immodestly and foolishly. One can speak this way and be far from confessing oneself a believer in Nietzsche's worldview. No further, however, than Nietzsche was from wishing for such believers. Indeed, he puts these words into the mouth of his Zarathustra. You say you believe in Zarathustra? But what does Zarathustra matter? You are my believers, but what do all believers matter? You had not yet sought yourselves. Then you found me. So do all believers. That is why all belief amounts to so little. Now I bid you lose me and find yourselves, and only when you have all denied me will I return to you. Nietzsche is no messiah or founder of religion. He may therefore wish for friends who share his opinions, but he cannot desire adherents to his doctrines who abandon their own selves to find his. In Nietzsche's personality, there are instincts to which entire spheres of thought of his contemporaries are repugnant. He turns away from the most important cultural ideas of those in whose midst he developed, with an instinctive aversion, and not in the way one rejects a statement in which a logical contradiction has been discovered, but as one turns away from a color that causes pain to the eye. The aversion stems from immediate feeling. Conscious deliberation does not even come into play initially. What other people feel when the thoughts of guilt, remorse, sin, afterlife, ideal, bliss, fatherland pass through their minds affects Nietzsche unpleasantly. This instinctive type of aversion to the mentioned ideas also distinguishes Nietzsche from the so-called freethinkers of the present. They know all intellectual objections to the old delusions, but how rarely does one find someone who can say of themselves, their instincts no longer cling to them. It is precisely the instincts that play nasty tricks on the freethinkers of the present. Thought takes on a character independent of traditional ideas, but the instincts cannot adapt to this changed character of the intellect. These free spirits substitute some concept of modern science for an older notion, but they speak of it in such a way that one recognizes the intellect goes a different path than the instincts. The intellect seeks the ultimate ground of phenomena in matter, in force, in natural law. but the instincts lead one to feel the same towards these entities as others feel towards their personal God. Spirits of this kind resist the accusation of atheism, but they do so not because their worldview leads them to something that aligns with any conception of God, but because they have inherited from their ancestors the characteristic of feeling an instinctive shudder at the word atheist. Great natural scientists emphasize that they do not wish to banish the concepts of God, immortality, but only to reshape them in the sense of modern science. Their instincts have simply lagged behind their intellect. A large number of these free spirits hold the view that human will is unfree. They say, in a certain case, a person must act as their character and the circumstances acting upon them dictate. However, observe these opponents of the free will view, and you will find that the instincts of these free thinkers recoil from the perpetrator of an evil deed with just as much abhorrence as do the instincts of others who believe that free will can turn to good or evil at will. The contradiction between intellect and instinct is the hallmark of our modern spirits. Even in the free thinkers of the present, the instincts planted by Christian orthodoxy still live. Exactly the opposite are active in Nietzsche's nature. He does not need to ponder whether there are reasons against the assumption of a personal world ruler. His instinct is too proud to bow before such a one. Therefore, he rejects such a notion. He says with his Zarathustra, "But that I may reveal my whole heart to you, my friends, if there were gods, how could I endure not to be a god? Therefore there are no gods. Nothing within him compels him to declare himself or another guilty for a committed action. To find such a guilty inadmissible, he needs no theory of free or unfree will." Even the patriotic sentiments of his German compatriots are repugnant to Nietzsche's instincts. He cannot make his feelings and thoughts dependent on the circles of thought of the people within which he was born and raised, nor on the time in which he lives. It is so provincial, he says in his work, Schopenhauer as Educator, to commit oneself to views that a few hundred miles further on no longer commit. Orient and Occident are chalk lines that someone draws before our eyes to fool our timidity. I want to try to achieve freedom, says the young soul, and should it hinder her that by chance two nations hate and fight each other, or that a sea lies between two parts of the world, or that a religion is taught all around us that did not exist a few thousand years ago. The sentiments of the Germans during the war in 1870 found such little resonance in his soul that he, while the thunder of the Battle of Wörth rolled across Europe, sat in a corner of the Alps, very pensive and enigmatic, consequently very troubled and untroubled at the same time, and wrote down his thoughts about the Greeks. And when he found himself under the walls of Metz a few weeks later, he still had not escaped the question marks he had placed on the life and art of the Greeks. Cf. Attempt at a self-criticism in the second edition of his Birth of Tragedy. When the war ended, he so little shared the enthusiasm of his German contemporaries for the victory achieved that as early as 1872, in his work on David Strauss, he spoke of bad and dangerous consequences of the victoriously concluded struggle. He even dismissed as an illusion the idea that German culture had also triumphed in this struggle, and he called this illusion dangerous because, if it becomes dominant within the German people, there is a danger of transforming the victory into a complete defeat, into the defeat, indeed extirpation, of the German spirit in favor of the German Empire. This is Nietzsche's attitude at a time when all of Europe is full of national enthusiasm. It is the attitude of an untimely personality, a fighter against his time. Besides what has been mentioned, much more could be named that is different in Nietzsche's emotional and imaginative life than in that of his contemporaries. 2. Nietzsche is not a thinker in the usual sense of the word. For the questionable and deeply penetrating questions he has to pose to the world and life, mere thinking is not enough. For these questions, all the forces of human nature must be unleashed. Thinking contemplation alone is not up to them. Nietzsche has no confidence in merely conceived reasons for an opinion. "There is a distrust in me against dialectics, even against reasons," he writes to Georg Brandes on December 2, 1887. Cf. his Men and Works, p. 212. Whoever asks him for the reasons for his views For them he has Zarathustra's answer ready. You ask why? I do not belong to those one may ask for their why. It is not whether an opinion can be logically proven that is decisive for him, but whether it acts on all the forces of the human personality in such a way that it has value for life. He only accepts a thought if he finds it suitable to contribute to the development of life. To see man as healthy as possible, as powerful as possible, as creative as possible, is his wish. Truth, beauty, all ideals only have value and concern man insofar as they are life-affirming. The question of the value of truth appears in several of Nietzsche's writings. In its boldest form, it is posed in his book, Beyond Good and Evil. The will to truth, which will still tempt us to many a venture, that famous truthfulness of which all philosophers have hitherto spoken with reverence. What questions has this will to truth already posed to us? What strange, bad, questionable questions? This is already a long story, and yet it seems that it has hardly just begun. What wonder if we finally also become suspicious, lose patience, turn impatiently away, that we, for our part, also learn to question from this Sphinx? Who is it actually? Who is asking us questions here? What in us actually wants to truth? In fact, we paused for a long time before the question of the cause of this will, until we at last stopped entirely before an even more fundamental question. We asked about the value of this will. Supposing we want truth, why not rather untruth? That is a thought of almost unsurpassed boldness. If one compares it with what another bold brooder and riddle friend, Johann Gottlieb Fichte, says about the pursuit of truth, one only then sees how deeply Nietzsche draws his ideas from the essence of human nature. I am called upon, says Fichte, to bear witness to the truth. Nothing depends on my life and my destiny. Infinitely much depends on the effects of my life. I am a priest of truth. I am in its pay. I have committed myself to do, dare, and suffer everything for it. Fichte lectures on the vocation of the scholar, 4th lecture. These words express the relationship that the noblest spirits of Western modern culture have with truth. Compared to Nietzsche's quoted statement, they appear superficial. One can object to them. Is it not possible that untruth has more valuable effects for life than truth? Is it impossible that truth harms life? Did Fichte ask himself these questions? Did others do so who bore witness to the truth? Nietzsche, however, asks these questions, and he believes he can only come to terms with them if he does not treat the pursuit of truth as a mere matter of intellect, but searches for the instincts that generate this pursuit. For it could well be that these instincts only use truth as a means to achieve something higher than truth. Nietzsche finds, after he has looked long enough between the lines and at the fingers of philosophers, most of a philosopher's thinking is secretly guided and forced into certain paths by his instincts. Philosophers believe that the ultimate driving force of their actions is the pursuit of truth. They believe this because they are unable to see the depths of human nature. In reality, the pursuit of truth is guided by the will to power. With the help of truth, the power and fullness of life of the personality are to be increased. The conscious thinking of the philosopher is of the opinion. The knowledge of truth is an ultimate goal. The unconscious instinct that drives thinking strives for the promotion of life. For this instinct, the falsity of a judgment is not yet an objection against a judgment. For it, only the question is relevant. How far is it life-promoting, life-preserving, species-preserving, perhaps even species-cultivating? Beyond Good and Evil, Part 4. Is it will to truth you call it, you wisest ones, that drives and inflames you? Will to the thinkability of all being, thus I call your will. You first want to make all being thinkable, for you doubt with good mistrust whether it is already thinkable. But it shall submit and bend to you. So wills your will. Smooth it shall become and subject to the spirit as its mirror and reflection. That is your whole will, you wisest ones, as a will to power. Zarathustra, Part 2, on Self-Overcoming. Truth is to make the world subject to the spirit and thereby serve life. Only as a condition of life does it have value. But can one not go even further and ask, what is life itself worth? Nietzsche considers such a question impossible. That all living things want to live as powerfully, as richly as possible, he accepts as a fact about which he does not ponder further. The instincts of life do not ask about the value of life. They only ask, what means are there to increase the power of their bearer? Judgments, value judgments about life, for or against, can ultimately never be true. They only have value as symptoms. They only come into consideration as symptoms. In themselves, such judgments are foolishness. One must absolutely reach out one's fingers and try to grasp the astonishing finesse that the value of life cannot be estimated. Not by a living person, because such a person is a party, indeed even an object of dispute, and not a judge. Not by a dead person, for another reason. To see a problem in the value of life from the perspective of a philosopher thus even remains an objection against him, a question mark on his wisdom and unwisdom. Twilight of the Idols, the problem of Socrates. The question of the value of life only exists for an inadequately developed, sick personality. Whoever is fully developed lives without asking how much their life is worth. Because Nietzsche holds the views described, he places little weight on logical proofs for a judgment. It's not about whether a judgment can be logically proven, but rather how well one can live under its influence. Not only the intellect, but the entire human personality should be satisfied. The best thoughts are those that set all the forces of human nature into motion in a way appropriate to them. Only thoughts of this kind are of interest to Nietzsche. He is not a philosophical mind, but a honey collector of the spirit, who seeks out the beehives of knowledge and tries to bring home what benefits life. In Nietzsche's personality, the instincts that make man a commanding, imperious being are predominant. He likes everything that demonstrates power. He dislikes everything that betrays weakness. He feels happy only as long as he is in living conditions that increase his strength. He loves obstacles, resistances to his activity, because in overcoming them, he becomes aware of his power. He seeks out the most arduous paths that man can walk. A fundamental trait of his character is expressed in the saying he placed on the title page of the second edition of his Gay Science. I dwell in my own house, have never imitated anyone, and laughed at every master still who had not laughed at himself. Nietzsche perceives every kind of subordination to an external power as weakness. And regarding what constitutes an external power, he thinks differently from many who call themselves independent free spirits. Nietzsche considers it a weakness when man, in his thinking and acting, submits to so-called eternal iron laws of reason. What the fully developed personality does, it does not let itself be dictated by any moral science, but solely by the impulses of its own self. Man is already weak the moment he searches for laws and rules according to which he should think and act. The strong determines the nature of his thinking and acting from his own being. Nietzsche expresses this view most sharply in sentences for which narrow-minded people have outright called him a dangerous spirit. When the Christian crusaders in the Orient encountered that unconquerable order of assassins, that order of free spirits par excellence, whose lowest ranks lived in an obedience such as no monastic order has ever achieved, they somehow also got a hint of that symbol and watchword, which was reserved only for the highest ranks, as their secret. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. Well, that was freedom of the spirit. With that, faith in truth itself was cancelled. Genealogy of Morality and 19. That these sentences express the feelings of a noble, a master nature, which does not want its permission to live freely, according to its own laws, to be diminished by any consideration for eternal truths and moral precepts, is not felt by those people who, by their nature, are suited to subservience. A personality like Nietzsche's does not tolerate even those tyrants who appear in the form of abstract moral commands. I determine how I want to think, how I want to act, such a nature says. There are people who derive their right to call themselves freethinkers from the fact that in their thinking and acting, they do not submit to laws originating from other people, but only to the eternal laws of reason, the unshakable concepts of duty, or the will of God. Nietzsche does not regard such people as truly strong personalities, for they too think and act not according to their own nature, but according to the commands of a higher authority. Whether the slave follows the arbitrary will of his master, the religious person the revealed truths of a god, or the philosopher the pronouncements of reason, this does not change the fact that they are all obedient. What commands is irrelevant. The decisive factor is that there is commanding at all, that man does not give himself the direction for his actions, but is of the opinion that there is a power that dictates this direction to him. The strong, truly free human being does not want to receive the truth. They want to create it. They do not want to be allowed anything. They do not want to obey. The true philosophers are commanders and lawgivers. They say, "Thus it shall be." They first determine the whither and the why of humanity, and thereby dispose of the preparatory work of all philosophical laborers, all conquerors of the past. They grasp the future with a creative hand, and everything that is and was becomes for them a means, a tool, a hammer. Their knowing is creating, their creating is a law-giving, their will to truth is will to power. Are there such philosophers today? Have there ever been such philosophers? Must there not be such philosophers? Beyond Good and Evil, Wolf 4. Nietzsche sees a particular sign of human weakness in every kind of belief in an afterlife, in a world other than the one in which humans live. In his view, one can do no greater harm to life than to arrange one's life in this world with a view to another life in the beyond. One can indulge in no greater error than to assume, behind the phenomena of this world, essences that are inaccessible to human knowledge, and that are supposed to be the actual primordial ground, the determining factor of all existence. Through such an assumption, one spoils one's joy in this world. One degrades it to mere appearance, to a mere reflection of something inaccessible. One declares the world known to us, the only real one for us, to be a futile dream and attributes true reality to a dreamed-up, fabricated other world. One declares the human senses to be deceivers who deliver illusory images instead of realities. Such a view can only stem from weakness. For the strong, who is firmly rooted in reality, who finds joy in life, will not entertain the idea of fabricating another reality. He is occupied with this world and needs no other. But the suffering, the sick, those dissatisfied with this life, take refuge in the beyond. What this world has denied them, the beyond is supposed to offer them. The strong, the healthy, who has developed and capable senses to seek out the reasons of this world within itself, needs no transcendent reasons and essences to explain the phenomena within which he lives. The weak, who perceives reality with crippled eyes and ears, needs causes behind the phenomena. From suffering and sick longing is born the belief in the beyond. From the inability to see through the real world have all assumptions of things in themselves arisen. All who have reason to deny real life say yes to a fabricated one. Nietzsche wants to be a yea-sayer to reality. He wants to explore this world in all directions. He wants to bore into the depths of existence. He wants to know nothing of another life. Him, even suffering cannot cause to say no to life, for even suffering is a means of knowledge to him. Just as a traveler, who resolves to wake up at a certain hour, then calmly gives himself over to sleep, so we philosophers, assuming we fall ill, temporarily surrender body and soul to illness. We, as it were, close our eyes to ourselves. And just as that one knows that something does not sleep, something counts the hours and will wake him up, so too we know that the decisive moment will find us awake, that then something will spring forth and catch the spirit in the act. I mean in weakness or reversal or surrender or hardening or darkening, and whatever all those morbid states of the spirit are called, which in healthy days have the pride of the spirit against them. After such self-interrogation, self-experimentation, one learns to look with a finer eye at everything that has ever been philosophized about. Preface to the second edition of The Gay Science. Nietzsche's life-affirming and reality-friendly sense also manifests in his views on people and their relationships. In this area, Nietzsche is a complete individualist. Every person is to him a world unto themselves, a unique being. The strangely colorful medley that is unified into a sameness and confronts us as a specific person, no matter how strange a coincidence, cannot be shaken together again in the same way. Schopenhauer as Educator 1. However, very few people are inclined to develop their unique characteristics, which exist only once. They fear the solitude into which they would be driven by doing so. It is more comfortable and safer to live in the same way as one's fellow human beings. one always finds company then. Whoever arranges their life in their own way is not understood by others and finds no companions. For Nietzsche, solitude has a special charm. He loves to seek out the secrets of his own inner self. He flees the company of people. His trains of thought are mostly drilling attempts for treasures hidden deep within his personality. He disdains the light that others offer him. He does not want to breathe the air that one breathes where the commonality of people, the rule of man, lives. He instinctively strives for his fortress and secrecy, where he is redeemed from the crowd, the many, the vast majority. Beyond good and evil, Tarf 36. In his Gay Science, he laments that it is difficult for him to digest his fellow human beings, and in Beyond Good and Evil, 282, he reveals that he usually suffered dangerous indigestion when he sat at tables where the fare of the universally human was enjoyed. People must not come too close to Nietzsche if he is to tolerate them. 6. Nietzsche declares a thought, a judgment, to be valid in the form to which the freely operating life instincts give their assent. He does not allow logical doubts to take away views that life has chosen. This gives his thinking a secure, free character. It is not disturbed by concerns such as whether an assertion is also objectively true, whether it exceeds the limits of human cognitive ability, etc. When Nietzsche has recognized the value of a judgment for life, he no longer asks for any further objective meaning and validity of it, and he does not worry about the limits of knowledge. He is of the opinion that healthy thinking creates what it can create, and does not torment itself with the useless question, "What can I not do?" Whoever wants to determine the value of a judgment by the degree to which it promotes life can, of course, only fix this degree through their own personal life drives and life instincts. They can never mean to say more than, "With regard to my life instincts, I consider this particular judgment to be valuable." And Nietzsche never means to say anything else when he expresses an opinion. It is precisely this relationship to his world of thought that has such a beneficial effect on the freedom-loving reader. It gives Nietzsche's writings the character of unpretentious, modest nobility. How repulsive and immodest it sounds by comparison when other thinkers believe their person is the organ through which eternal, irrefutable truths are proclaimed to the world. One can find sentences in Nietzsche's works that express a strong self-awareness, e.g., "I have given humanity the deepest book it possesses, my Zarathustra. I shall soon give it the most independent. Twilight of the Idols, Raids of an Untimely Man, Plage 51. But what does this mean from his mouth? I have dared to write a book whose content is drawn more deeply from the essence of a personality than is usually the case with similar books, and I will deliver a book that is more independent of any external judgment than other philosophical writings. For I will merely state about the most important things how my personal instincts relate to them. This is noble modesty. It certainly goes against the taste of those whose hypocritical humility says, I am nothing, my work is everything. I bring nothing of personal feeling into my books, but merely express what pure reason tells me to express. Such people want to deny their person in order to be able to claim that their pronouncements are those of a higher spirit. Nietzsche considers his thoughts to be products of his person and nothing more. 7. Professional philosophers may scoff at Nietzsche or offer their opinions on the dangers of his worldview. Some of these minds, who are nothing more than personified textbooks of logic, naturally cannot praise Nietzsche's work, which springs from the most powerful, immediate impulses of life. Nietzsche, with his bold leaps of thought, certainly delves into deeper secrets of human nature than many a logical thinker with his cautious creeping. What use is all logic if its conceptual nets only catch worthless content? If valuable thoughts are communicated to us, we rejoice in them, even if they are not linked by logical threads. The salvation of life depends not only on logic, but also on the generation of ideas. Our professional philosophy is currently barren enough, and it could very well use the invigoration of ideas from a courageous, daring writer like Nietzsche. The developmental power of this professional philosophy is paralyzed by the influence that Kantian thought has had on it. Through this influence, it has lost all originality, all courage. Kant adopted the concept of truths stemming from pure reason, from the school philosophy of his time. He tried to show that through such truth, we can know nothing of things that lie beyond our experience, of things in themselves. For a century now, immeasurable ingenuity has been expended to thoroughly explore this Kantian idea from all sides. The products of this ingenuity are, however, often meager and trivial. If one were to translate the banalities of many a contemporary philosophical book from scholarly formulas into healthy language, such content would appear pitifully meager compared to many a short aphorism by Nietzsche. In view of contemporary philosophy, he could, with some justification, utter the proud sentence, "My ambition is to say in 10 sentences what everyone else says in a book, what everyone else doesn't say in a book." Just as Nietzsche intends to offer nothing in his own opinions but a product of his personal instincts and drives, so too are foreign views nothing more to him than symptoms from which he infers the instincts prevailing in individuals or entire peoples, races, etc. He does not bother with discussions or refutations of foreign opinions. Instead, he seeks out the instincts that express themselves in these opinions. He tries to discern the characters of personalities or peoples from their views. He is interested in whether a view points to the predominance of instincts for health, bravery, nobility, joy of life, or whether it springs from unhealthy, slavish, weary, life-hostile instincts. Truths in themselves are indifferent to him. He cares about how people develop their truths according to their instincts and how they thereby promote their life goals. He wants to uncover the natural causes of human views. Nietzsche's endeavor is certainly not in line with the idealists who attribute an independent value to truth, who want to give it a pure, higher origin than that from instincts. He declares human views to be the result of natural forces, just as the natural scientist explains the structure of the eye from the interaction of natural causes. He no more recognizes an explanation of humanity's spiritual development from particular moral purposes, ideals, from a moral world order, than the contemporary natural scientist recognizes the explanation that nature built the eye in a certain way because it had the purpose of creating an organ for sight for the organism. In every ideal, Nietzsche sees only the expression of an instinct that seeks its satisfaction in a particular way, just as the modern natural scientist sees the result of organic formative laws in the purposeful arrangement of an organ. If there are still natural scientists and philosophers today who reject all creation of nature according to purposes, but stop short of moral idealism, and see in history the realization of a divine will, an ideal order of things, this is a half-hearted instinct. Such persons lack the correct perspective for judging spiritual processes, while they demonstrate it in observing natural processes. If a person believes he is striving for an ideal that does not originate from reality, he believes this only because he does not know the instinct from which this ideal arises. Nietzsche is an anti-idealist in the same sense that modern natural scientists are opposed to the assumption of purposes that nature is supposed to realize. He speaks as little of moral purposes as the natural scientist speaks of natural purposes. Nietzsche does not consider it wiser to say, man should realize a moral ideal, than to declare, the bull has horns so that it can gore. He regards both statements as products of a world explanation that speaks of divine providence, wise omnipotence, instead of natural effects. This world explanation is a hindrance to all healthy thinking. It creates a fictitious ideal fog that prevents the natural vision, directed at observing reality, from seeing through world events. It finally dulls all sense of reality completely. When Nietzsche engages in a spiritual struggle, he does not want to refute foreign opinions as such, but he does so because these opinions point to harmful, unnatural instincts that he wants to combat. In doing so, he has a similar intention to someone who fights a harmful natural effect or eradicates a dangerous natural creature. He does not rely on the convincing power of truth, but on the fact that he will defeat the opponent if the latter has unhealthy, harmful instincts, while he himself has healthy, life-promoting ones. He seeks no further justification for such a struggle if his instincts perceive those of the opponent as harmful. He does not believe he has to fight as a representative of any idea, but he fights because his instincts drive him to do so. It is true that this is no different in any intellectual struggle, but usually, the combatants are as unaware of the real driving forces as philosophers are of their will to power, or the adherents of the moral world order are of the natural causes of their moral ideals. They believe that merely opinion fights against opinion, and they conceal their real motives with conceptual cloaks. They also do not name the opponent's instincts that they find unsympathetic. Indeed, these may not even come to their consciousness. In short, the forces that are actually hostile to each other do not openly emerge. Nietzsche ruthlessly names the instincts of the opponent that he despises, and he also names the instincts that he opposes to them. Whoever wants to call this cynicism may do so. But they should not overlook that in all human activity there has never been anything other than such cynicism, and that all idealistic webs of delusion are woven from this cynicism. 2. The Overman 10. All human striving, like that of every living creature, consists in satisfying drives and instincts, implanted by nature in the best possible way. If people strive for virtue, justice, knowledge, and art, this is because virtue, justice, etc., are means by which human instincts can develop in a way that corresponds to their nature. Without these means, the instincts would atrophy. It is now a peculiarity of man that he forgets this connection of his living conditions with his natural drives, and regards those means to a natural, powerful life as something that in itself has an unconditional value. Man then says, virtue, justice, knowledge, etc., must be striven for their own sake. They do not have value because they serve life, but rather life only gains value by striving for those ideal goods. Man is not there to live according to his instincts, like the animal. Rather, he should ennoble his instincts by putting them in the service of higher purposes. In this way, man comes to worship what he himself first created for the satisfaction of his drives, as ideals that first give his life its proper consecration. He demands submission to the ideals that he values higher than himself. He detaches himself from the fertile ground of reality and wants to give his existence a higher meaning and purpose. He invents an unnatural origin for his ideals. He calls them the will of God, the eternal moral commandments. He wants to strive for truth's sake, virtue for virtue's sake. He considers himself a good person only when he has supposedly succeeded in taming his selfishness, i.e., his natural instincts, and selflessly following an ideal goal. To such an idealist, the man who has not achieved such self-overcoming is considered ignoble and evil. Now, all ideals originally stem from natural instincts. Even what a Christian considers a virtue revealed to them by God was originally invented by humans to satisfy some instinct or another. The natural origin has been forgotten, and the divine has been added. The same applies to the virtues established by philosophers and moral preachers. If people only had healthy instincts and determined their ideals accordingly, the theoretical error regarding the origin of these ideals would not cause harm. The idealists would have false views about the provenance of their goals, but these goals themselves would be healthy, and life would flourish. However, there are unhealthy instincts that aim not at strengthening and promoting life, but at weakening and stunting it. These instincts seize upon the aforementioned theoretical error and turn it into a practical purpose in life. They mislead people into saying, a perfect person is not one who wants to serve themselves and their life, but one who dedicates themselves to the realization of an ideal. Under the influence of these instincts, people do not merely stop at mistakenly attributing an unnatural or supernatural origin to their goals. Rather, they genuinely create such ideals or adopt them from others that do not serve the needs of life. They no longer strive to bring forth the powers inherent in their personality, but live according to a pattern imposed on their nature. Whether they derive this goal from a religion, or whether they determine it themselves based on certain presuppositions not inherent in their nature, is irrelevant. The philosopher who has a general purpose for humanity in mind and derives their moral ideals from it imposes chains on human nature just as much as the religious founder who tells people, "This is the goal God has set for you, and you must follow it." It is also irrelevant whether a person sets out to become an image of God or invents an ideal of the perfect human. and wants to become as similar to it as possible. Only the individual human being and the drives and instincts of that individual human being are real. Only when focusing on the needs of their own person can a human being learn what benefits their life. The individual human being does not become perfect by denying themselves and becoming like a model, but by realizing what strives for realization within them. Human activity does not first gain meaning by serving an impersonal, external purpose. It has its meaning within itself. The anti-idealist will still see an expression of instinct, even in the unhealthy turning away of humans from their innermost instincts. They know that humans can only accomplish what is contrary to instinct out of instinct. However, they will still fight against what is contrary to instinct, just as a doctor fights a disease, even though they know that it naturally arose from certain causes. Therefore, the anti-idealist should not be accused of. You claim that everything a human strives for, including all ideals, arose naturally, yet you fight idealism. Certainly, ideals arise as naturally as diseases, but the healthy person fights idealism just as they fight disease. The idealist, however, sees ideals as something that must be cherished and cultivated. The belief that humans only become perfect when they serve higher purposes is, in Nietzsche's opinion, something that must be overcome. Humans must reflect on themselves and recognize that they have only created ideals to serve themselves. Living naturally is healthier than pursuing ideals that supposedly do not originate from reality. Nietzsche places the person who does not serve impersonal goals, but who seeks the purpose and meaning of their existence within themselves, who makes virtues their own that serve their unfolding power, their complete mastery. This person Nietzsche places higher than the selfless idealist. This is what he proclaims through his Zarathustra. The sovereign individual who knows that he can only live out of his own nature and who sees his personal goal and a way of life corresponding to his being is for Nietzsche the overman, in contrast to the human who believes that life has been given to him to serve a purpose outside himself. Zarathustra teaches the overman, i.e., the human who knows how to live naturally. He teaches people to regard their virtues as their creations. He tells them to despise those who value their virtues more highly than themselves. Zarathustra went into solitude to free himself from the humility in which people bow before their virtues. He only returns among people when he has learned to despise those virtues that curb life and do not want to serve life. He now moves lightly like a dancer, for he follows only himself and his will, and disregards the lines prescribed for him by virtues. The belief that it is wrong to follow only oneself no longer weighs heavily on his back. Zarathustra no longer sleeps to dream of ideals. He is a watchful one who freely confronts reality. To him, the person who has lost himself and lies in the dust before his own creations is a dirty stream. The overman is to him a sea that absorbs this stream without becoming impure itself. For the overman has found himself. He recognizes himself as the master and creator of his virtues. Zarathustra has experienced the great truth that all virtue placed above man has become an abomination to him. What is the greatest thing you can experience? That is the hour of great contempt. The hour when your happiness becomes disgusting to you, and likewise your reason and your virtue. 11. Zarathustra's wisdom is not in the sense of the modern educated. They want to make all people equal. If everyone strives for one goal, they say, then there will be contentment and happiness on earth. People should restrain their particular personal desires, they demand, and serve only the general public, the common good. Peace and tranquility will then reign on earth. If everyone has the same needs, then no one will disturb the circles of another. The individual should not have himself and his individual goals in mind, but everyone should live according to a predetermined template. All individual life should disappear, and all should become members of the common world order. No shepherd and one flock, everyone wants the same, everyone is equal. Whoever feels differently voluntarily goes to the madhouse. Formerly, the whole world was mad, say the most refined and blink. One is clever and knows everything that has happened, so one never stops mocking. One still quarrels, but one soon reconciles, otherwise it spoils the stomach. Zarathustra has been a hermit for too long to embrace such wisdom. He has heard the peculiar tones that resonate from within the personality when one stands apart from the noise of the marketplace, where one merely parrots the words of another. And he wants to shout into people's ears. Listen to the voices that resonate only within each of you, for only these are natural. Only these tell each person what they are capable of. An enemy of life, of rich, full life, is he who lets these voices fade unheard and listens to the common cry of people. Zarathustra does not want to speak to the friends of human equality. They could only misunderstand him, for they would believe that his overman is that ideal archetype to which all should conform. But Zarathustra does not want to lay down rules for people on how they should be. He only wants to refer each individual to himself and tell him, abandon yourself to yourself, follow only yourself, place yourself above virtue, wisdom, and knowledge. Zarathustra speaks to those who want to seek themselves. His words are not for a crowd seeking a common goal, but for companions who, like him, go their own way. They alone understand him, for they know that he does not mean to say, behold, this is the overman, become like him, but rather, behold, I have sought myself. Thus I am as I teach you. Go forth and seek yourselves likewise. Then you will have the overman. To the hermits I will sing my song, and to the two hermits, and whoever still has ears for the unheard, to him I will make his heart heavy with my happiness. 12. Two animals, the serpent as the wisest and the eagle as the proudest animal, accompany Zarathustra. They are symbols of his instincts. Zarathustra values wisdom, for it teaches man to find the intricate paths of reality. It teaches him to know what he needs for life. And Zarathustra also loves pride, for pride engenders man's self-respect, through which he comes to regard himself as the meaning and purpose of his existence. The proud man does not place his wisdom, his virtue, above himself. Pride preserves man from forgetting himself over higher, holier goals. Zarathustra would rather lose wisdom than pride. For wisdom, when not accompanied by pride, does not see itself as a human creation. He who lacks pride and self-respect believes his wisdom is a gift from heaven. Such a one says, man is a fool, and he has only as much wisdom as heaven wills to grant him. And if one day my wisdom leaves me, it loves to fly away, may my pride then still fly with my folly. 13. The human spirit must undergo 3 transformations until it has found itself. This is what Zarathustra teaches. The spirit is first reverent. It calls virtue that which weighs upon it. It humbles itself to exalt its virtue. It says, all wisdom is with God, and I must follow God's ways. God places the heaviest burdens upon me to test my strength, to see if it is strong and patiently endures. Only the patient are strong. I will obey, says the spirit at this stage, and carry out the commands of the world spirit, without asking what the meaning of these commands is. The spirit feels the pressure exerted upon it by a higher power. The spirit does not go its own way, but the way of him whom it serves. The time comes when the spirit realizes that no God speaks to it. Then it wants to be free and master in its own world. It seeks a guideline for its destiny. It no longer asks the world spirit how it should arrange its life, but it strives for a firm law, for a holy thou shalt. It seeks a standard to measure the value of things. It seeks a distinguishing mark between good and evil. There must be a rule for my life that does not depend on me, on my will. So speaks the spirit at this stage. I will submit to this rule. I am free, thinks the spirit, but only free to obey such a rule. The spirit also overcomes this stage. It becomes like the child who in its play does not ask, how should I do this or that, but only carries out its will, only follows itself. Its will now wills the spirit. Its world, the world lost one, gains for itself. 3 transformations of the spirit I named to you. How the spirit became a camel, and the camel a lion, and the lion at last a child. Thus spoke Zarathustra. 14. What do the wise ones want, who place virtue above man? Asks Zarathustra. They say, peace of soul can only be had by him who has done his duty, who has followed the holy thou shalt. Man should be virtuous, so that after duty done he can dream of fulfilled ideals and feel no pangs of conscience. A man with pangs of conscience, say the virtuous, resembles a sleeper whose night's rest is disturbed by bad dreams. Few know this, but one must have all virtues to sleep well. Shall I bear false witness? Shall I commit adultery? Shall I lust after my neighbor's maid? all that would hardly be compatible with a good night's sleep. Peace with God and your neighbor, so good sleep wills it, and peace also with your neighbor's devil, otherwise he will haunt you at night. The virtuous person does not do what their impulse dictates, but what brings peace of mind. They live to be able to dream peacefully about life. They prefer it even more if the sleep they call peace of mind is not disturbed by any dream at all. This means the virtuous person prefers it most when they receive the rules of their actions from somewhere and can otherwise enjoy their peace. Their wisdom is called to stay awake in order to sleep well. And truly, if life had no meaning, and I had to choose nonsense, then even for me this would be the most choice-worthy nonsense, says Zarathustra. There was also a time for Zarathustra when he believed that a spirit dwelling outside the world, a god, had created the world. Zarathustra imagined a dissatisfied, suffering God. To find satisfaction, to be freed from his suffering, God had created the world, Zarathustra once thought. But he has learned to realize that it was a delusion he had created himself. Ah, my brothers, this God I created was human work and madness, like all gods. Zarathustra has learned to use his senses and observe the world, and he became content with the world. His thoughts no longer wandered into the beyond. He was formerly blind and could not see the world, so he sought his salvation outside the world. But Zarathustra has learned to see and to recognize that the world has its meaning within itself. Myself taught me a new pride, which I teach to humans, no longer to bury one's head in the sand of heavenly things, but to carry it freely, my earthly head, which creates meaning for the earth. 15. Idealists have split man into body and soul. They have divided all existence into idea and reality, and they have made the soul, the spirit, the idea into something particularly valuable, in order to be able to despise reality, the body, all the more. Zarathustra, however, says, there is only one reality, only one body, and the soul is only something of the body, the idea only something of reality. The body and soul of man are a unity. Body and spirit spring from one root. The spirit is only there because a body is there, which has the power to develop the spirit within itself. As the plant unfolds the blossom within itself, so the body unfolds the spirit within itself. Behind your thoughts and feelings, my brother, stands a mighty ruler, an unknown sage, that is called self. He dwells in your body, he is your body. Whoever has a sense for the real seeks the spirit, the soul in and on the real. They seek reason in the real. Only whoever considers reality to be spiritless, merely natural, crude, gives the spirit, the soul, a separate existence. They make reality a mere dwelling place for the spirit. Such a person, however, also lacks the sense for perceiving the spirit itself. Only because they do not see the spirit in reality do they seek it elsewhere. There is more reason in your body than in your best wisdom. The body is a great reason, a multiplicity with one sense, a war and a peace, a flock and a shepherd. Your little reason, my brother, which you call spirit, is also an instrument of your body, a small tool and plaything of your great reason. He is a fool who tears the blossom from the plant and believes that the torn-off blossom will now develop into fruit. He is equally a fool who separates the spirit from nature and believes that such a separated spirit can still create. People with sick instincts have brought about the separation of spirit and body. Only a sick instinct can say, "My kingdom is not of this world." The kingdom of a healthy instinct is only this world. 16. What ideals these despisers of reality have created. Let us consider them, the ideals of the ascetics who say, "Turn your gaze away from this world and look to the beyond." What do ascetic ideals mean? With this question and the conjectures with which he answers it, Nietzsche has given us the deepest insight into his heart, which was unsatisfied by modern Western culture. Genealogy of Morals, third essay. When an artist, like Richard Wagner in the last period of his creative work, becomes a follower of the ascetic ideal, it doesn't mean much. The artist stands above his creations throughout his life. He looks down upon his realities. He creates realities that are not his reality. A Homer would not have composed an Achilles. A Goethe would not have composed a Faust if Homer had been an Achilles and if Goethe had been a Faust. Genealogy, third essay, Tef 4. If such an artist then takes his own existence seriously, wanting to translate himself and his personal views into reality, it is no wonder if something very unreal emerges. Richard Wagner completely reevaluated his art when he became acquainted with Schopenhauer's philosophy. Before, he considered music to be a means of expression that needed something to express, drama. In his work Opera and Drama, written in 1851, he states that the greatest error one can commit regarding opera is that a means of expression, music, is made into the end, while the end of expression, drama, is made into the means. He adopted a different view after learning about Schopenhauer's doctrine of music. Schopenhauer believed that through music, the essence of things themselves speaks to us. The eternal will, which lives in all things, is embodied in all other arts only in its reflections, in ideas. Music is not a mere image of the will. In it, the will reveals itself directly. What appears to us in all our perceptions only as a reflection, the eternal ground of all being, the will, Schopenhauer believed he perceived directly in the sounds of music. For Schopenhauer, music brings tidings from the beyond. This view influenced Richard Wagner. He no longer regarded music as a means of expressing real human passions, as embodied in drama, but rather as a kind of mouthpiece of the thing in itself, a telephone to the beyond. Richard Wagner now no longer believed he was expressing reality in tones. Henceforth, he not only spoke music, this ventriloquist of God, he spoke metaphysics. What wonder that one day he spoke ascetic ideals. Genealogy, third essay, b5. Had Richard Wagner merely changed his view on the meaning of music, Nietzsche would have had no reason to reproach him. Nietzsche could then at most have said, in addition to his artworks, Wagner also created all sorts of misguided theories about art. But the fact that Wagner, in the last period of his creative work, also embodied Schopenhauer's belief in the beyond in his artworks, that he used his music to glorify the flight from reality, that went against Nietzsche's taste. But the case of Wagner means nothing when it comes to the significance of glorifying the beyond at the expense of this world, when it comes to the significance of ascetic ideals. Artists do not stand on their own feet. Just as Richard Wagner was dependent on Schopenhauer, so artists at all times were valets to a morality or philosophy or religion. It is different when philosophers advocate for contempt of reality, for ascetic ideals. They do this out of a deep instinct. Schopenhauer betrayed this instinct through the description he gives of the creation and enjoyment of a work of art. That the work of art thus greatly facilitates the apprehension of ideas in which aesthetic pleasure consists, rests not merely on the fact that art, by highlighting the essential and sifting out the inessential, represents things more clearly and characteristically, but equally on the fact that the complete silencing of the will, required for the objective apprehension of the essence of things, is most certainly achieved when the object contemplated does not lie at all in the realm of things capable of a relation to the will. Supplements to the third book of the world as Will and Representation, chap. 21. But when an external occasion or an internal mood suddenly lifts us out of the endless stream of willing, snatches knowledge from the slavish service of the will, attention is no longer directed to the motives of willing, but apprehends things free from their relation to the will. Thus, without interest, without subjectivity, considering them purely objectively, completely devoted to them, insofar as they are merely representations, not insofar as they are motives. Then, the painless state, which Epicurus praised as the highest good and as the state of the gods, has arrived. For we are for that moment freed from the ignoble urge of the will. We celebrate the Sabbath of the prison labor of willing. The wheel of Ixion stands still. The world as will and representation, paragraph 38. This is a description of a kind of aesthetic pleasure that occurs only in the philosopher. Nietzsche contrasts it with another description, made by a real spectator and artist, Stendhal, who calls beauty une promesse de bonheur, a promise of happiness. Schopenhauer wants to exclude all interest of the will, all real life, when contemplating a work of art, and to enjoy it only with the spirit. Stendhal sees in the work of art a promise of happiness, thus an indication of life, and sees the value of art in this connection of art with life. Kant demands of a beautiful work of art that it please without interest, i.e., that it lift us out of real life and provide a purely spiritual enjoyment. What does the philosopher seek in artistic enjoyment? Redemption from reality. The philosopher wants to be transported by the work of art into a mood alien to reality. He thereby betrays his fundamental instinct. The philosopher feels most comfortable in moments when he can detach himself from reality. His view of aesthetic enjoyment shows that he does not love reality. In their theories, philosophers do not tell us what the life-affirming spectator demands of the work of art, but only what is appropriate for themselves. And for the philosopher, turning away from life is very beneficial. He does not want his intricate thought processes to be crossed by reality. Thinking thrives better when the philosopher turns away from life. It is no wonder, then, that this fundamental philosophical instinct develops into an anti-life sentiment. We find such a sentiment developed in the majority of philosophers, and it is natural for the philosopher to develop his own antipathy towards life into a doctrine and to demand that all people subscribe to such a doctrine. Schopenhauer did this. He found that the noise of the world disturbed his thought work. He felt that one could best reflect on reality by escaping from it. At the same time, he forgot that all thinking about reality only has value if it springs from this reality. He did not consider that the philosopher's withdrawal from reality can only happen so that the philosophical thoughts, developed away from life, can then serve life all the better. If the philosopher wants to impose the fundamental instinct, which is only beneficial to him as a philosopher, on all humanity, then he becomes an enemy of life. The philosopher who views world flight not as a means to generate world-friendly thoughts, but as an end, a goal, can only create worthlessness. The true philosopher only flees reality on one side to burrow all the more deeply into it on the other. But it is understandable that this fundamental instinct can easily tempt the philosopher to consider world flight as such to be valuable. Then the philosopher becomes an advocate of world denial. He teaches turning away from life, an ascetic ideal. He finds a certain asceticism, a hard and cheerful renunciation of the best will belongs to the favorable conditions of the highest spirituality, as well as to its most natural consequences. Thus, it will not be surprising from the outset if the ascetic ideal has never been treated by philosophers without some prejudice. Genealogy of Morality, 3rd section, 8:17. The ascetic ideals of priests have a different origin. What arises in the philosopher from the overgrowth of a legitimate drive in him forms the fundamental ideal of priestly activity. The priest sees man's devotion to real life as an error. He demands that one should regard this life as inferior to another life, which is guided by forces higher than merely natural ones. The priest denies that real life has meaning in itself, and he demands that this meaning be conferred upon it by the inoculation of a higher will. He considers life in temporality as imperfect and contrasts it with an eternal, perfect life. The priest teaches turning away from temporality and turning towards the eternal, unchangeable. I would like to quote some sentences from the famous book, The German Theology, which dates from the 14th century and about which Luther said that he had learned more about what God, Christ, and man are from no other book except the Bible and St. Augustine. Schopenhauer also finds that the spirit of Christianity is perfectly and powerfully expressed in this book. After the author, who is unknown to us, has explained that all things in the world are only imperfect and divided compared to the perfect, which has comprehended and enclosed all beings in itself and in its essence, and without which and apart from which there is no true being, and in which all things have their being, he explains that man can only penetrate into this being if he has lost all creatureliness, createdness, I-ness, selfhood, and the like, and has annihilated them within himself. What has flowed out of the perfect and what man recognizes as his real world is characterized as follows. That is no true being and has no being other than in the perfect, but it is an accident or a splendor and a semblance that is no being or has no being other than in the fire from which the splendor flows, or in the sun, or in the light. Scripture speaks, and faith and truth. Sin is nothing other than that the creature turns away from the unchangeable good and turns to the changeable. That is, that it turns from the perfect to the divided and imperfect, and most of all to itself. Now note, if the creature takes something good for itself as being life, knowledge, understanding, power, and in short, everything that should be called good, and believes that it is that, or that it is its own, or belongs to it, or that it is from it. As often and much as this happens, it turns away. What else did the devil do, or what else was his fall and turning away, than that he assumed he was also something, and something was his, and something also belonged to him? This assumption, and his I and his me, his to me and his my, that was his turning away and his fall. So it still is. For all that which is considered good or should be called good belongs to no one but the eternal true good, who alone is God, and whoever takes it for himself does wrong and against God. Chapters 1, 2, 4 of the German Theology, 3rd ed., translated by Pfeiffer. These sentences express the attitude of every priest. They express the true character of priesthood. And this character is the opposite of what Nietzsche described as the superior, the life-affirming. The superior type of human wants to be everything they are only through themselves. They want everything they consider good and call good to belong to no one but themselves. But that inferior disposition is no exception. It is one of the broadest and longest facts that exist. Read from a distant star, perhaps the majuscule script of our earthly existence would lead to the conclusion that the earth is actually the ascetic star, a corner of discontented, proud, and disagreeable creatures who could not get rid of a deep vexation with themselves, with the earth, with all life. Genealogy of Morality, 3rd essay, 11. The ascetic priest is therefore a necessity because the majority of people suffer from an inhibition and fatigue of life forces, because they suffer from reality. The ascetic priest is the comforter and physician of those who suffer from life. He comforts them by telling them, "This life from which you suffer is not the true life. The true life is much more accessible to those who suffer from this life than to the healthy who cling to this life and surrender to it." Through such pronouncements, the priest cultivates contempt, the defamation of this real life. He finally produces the attitude that says, to achieve true life, this real life must be denied. In spreading this attitude, the ascetic priest seeks his strength. By cultivating this attitude, he eliminates a great danger that threatens the healthy, strong, self-aware from the unfortunate, downtrodden, broken. The latter hate the healthy and those physically and mentally happy who draw their strength from nature. The priest seeks to suppress this hatred, which would have to manifest itself in the weak waging a continuous war of annihilation against the strong. He therefore portrays the strong as those who lead a worthless, undignified life, and, in contrast, asserts that true life is only accessible to those who are harmed by earthly life. The ascetic priest must be regarded as the predestined savior, shepherd, and advocate of the sick flock. Only then do we understand his enormous historical mission. Dominion over sufferers is his kingdom. To it his instinct points him. In it he has his very own art, his mastery, his kind of happiness. Genealogy, 3rd essay, 15. It is no wonder if such a way of thinking finally leads its adherents not only to despise life, but even to actively work towards its destruction. If people are told that only the suffering, the weak, can truly come to a higher life, then suffering, weakness will finally be sought. Inflicting pain on oneself, completely killing the will within oneself, that will become the goal of life. The victims of this attitude are the saints. Complete chastity and renunciation of all lust for him who strives for true holiness. Abandonment of all possessions, leaving every dwelling place, all relatives, deep, complete solitude, spent in silent contemplation, with voluntary penance and terrible slow self-torture, to the complete mortification of the will, which finally leads to voluntary death by hunger, also by going to meet crocodiles, by plunging from the sacred rock peak in the Himalayas, by being buried alive, also by throwing oneself under the wheels of the chariot carrying the idols amidst the singing, jubilation, and dancing of the bayaderas. These are the ultimate fruits of the ascetic disposition. Schopenhauer, World as Will and Representation, page 68. This mindset, born of suffering in life, turns its weapons against life itself. If it infects a healthy, joyful person, it eradicates their sound, strong instincts. Nietzsche's work culminates in asserting something different against this doctrine, a perspective for the healthy and well-formed. Let the failures and the corrupt seek their salvation in the teachings of the ascetic priests. Nietzsche wants to gather the healthy around him and offer them an opinion that suits them better than any life-hostile ideal. 18. Even the proponents of modern science still harbor the ascetic ideal. While this science boasts of having discarded all old beliefs and adhering solely to reality, it refuses to acknowledge anything that cannot be counted, calculated, weighed, seen, or grasped. The fact that this approach degrades existence into a mere exercise in arithmetic and a sedentary life for mathematicians is of no concern to modern scholars. The Gay Science, paragraph 373. Such a scholar does not claim the right to interpret the occurrences of the world passing before their senses and reason so as to master them with their thought. They say, truth must be independent of my art of interpretation, and I am not to create truth, but rather to let it be dictated to me by the phenomena of the world. What this modern science ultimately arrives at, when it refrains from all attempts to arrange the world's phenomena, has been articulated by a follower of this science, Richard Wall, in a recently published book, The Whole of Philosophy and Its End. What could the spirit, peering into the world's casing and revolving within itself questions about the essence and goal of events, finally find as an answer? It befell it that, as it seemingly stood in opposition to the surrounding world, it dissolved and flowed together with all occurrences in a flight of events. It no longer knew the world. It said, I am not sure that knowers exist, but occurrences exist purely and simply. They come, of course, in such a way that the concept of knowledge could arise prematurely, unjustifiably, and concepts flitted up to bring light into the occurrences, but they were will-o'-the-wisps, souls of desires for knowledge, pathetic postulates of an unfulfilled form of knowledge, meaningless in their evidence. Unknown factors must prevail in the change. Darkness was spread over their nature. Occurrences are the veil of the truthful. Modern scholars do not consider that the human personality can infuse meaning into the occurrences of reality and, by its own power, supplement the unknown factors that govern the flux of events. They do not want to interpret the fleeting appearances through ideas stemming from their personality. They merely want to observe and describe phenomena, not to interpret them. They wish to stick to the factual and not allow creative imagination to form a coherent picture of reality. When an imaginative natural scientist, such as Ernst Haeckel, constructs a comprehensive picture of the evolution of organic life on Earth from the results of individual observations, these fanatics of factuality pounce on him, accusing him of sinning against the truth. The images he creates of life in nature cannot be seen with their eyes or grasped with their hands. They prefer impersonal judgment to that colored by the spirit of personality. In their observations, they would most prefer to completely exclude personality. It is the ascetic ideal that dominates these fanatics of factuality. They desire a truth beyond personal, individual judgment. What man can fantasize into things does not concern them. Truth to them is something absolutely perfect, a god. Man is to discover it, surrender to it, but not create it. Natural scientists and historians are currently animated by the same spirit of the ascetic ideal. Everywhere, enumeration, description of facts, and nothing more. Any arrangement of facts is frowned upon. All personal judgment is to be omitted. Among these modern scholars are also atheists, but these atheists are no freer spirits than their contemporaries who believe in God. The existence of God cannot be proven by the means of modern science. Indeed, one of the luminaries of modern science, Du Bois-Reymond, expressed himself about the assumption of a world soul as follows. Before the natural scientist decides on such an assumption, he demands that somewhere in the world, embedded in neuroglia and nourished with warm arterial blood under proper pressure, a convolution of ganglion cells and nerve fibers corresponding in scope to the spiritual capacity of such a soul be shown to him. Limits of Natural Knowledge, p. 44. Modern science rejects belief in God because this belief cannot coexist with belief in objective truth. But this objective truth is nothing other than a new God who has triumphed over the old one. Unconditional, honest atheism, and its air alone we breathe, we more spiritual people of this age, is not in opposition to that ascetic ideal, as it seems. It is rather only one of its last phases of development, one of its concluding forms and inner consistencies. It is the awe-inspiring catastrophe of a 2,000-year discipline of truth, which in the end forbids itself the lie in the belief in God. Genealogy, 3rd section, 27. The Christian seeks truth in God because he considers God the source of all truth. The modern atheist rejects belief in God because his God, his ideal of truth, forbids him this belief. The modern spirit sees in God a human creation. In truth, it sees something that exists by itself without any human intervention. The truly free spirit goes even further. He asks, what does all will to truth mean? Why truth? All truth arises from man's reflection on the phenomena of the world, from his forming thoughts about things. Man himself is the creator of truth. The free spirit becomes conscious of his creation of truth. He no longer regards truth as something to which he subordinates himself. He regards it as his creature. 19. People endowed with weak, misguided cognitive instincts do not dare to ascribe meaning to world phenomena out of the concept-forming power of their personality. They want the regularity of nature to appear before their senses as a fact. A subjective worldview, shaped according to the constitution of the human mind, seems worthless to them. But the mere observation of occurrences in the world provides us only with a disconnected and yet not individually separated worldview. To the mere observer of things, no object, no event appears more important, more significant than another. The rudimentary organ of an organism, which perhaps, when we have thought about it, appears to be of no significance for the development of life, stands there with the same claim to attention as the noblest part of the organism, as long as we merely observe the objective facts. Cause and effect are successive phenomena that flow into each other without being separated by anything, as long as we merely observe them. Only when we begin to think, to separate the flowing phenomena and relate them to each other conceptually, does a lawful connection become visible. Only thinking declares one phenomenon to be the cause, the other to be the effect. We see a raindrop fall to the ground and cause a depression. A being that cannot think will not see cause and effect here, but only a sequence of phenomena. A thinking being isolates the phenomena, brings the isolated facts into a relationship, and designates one fact as cause, the other as effect. Through observation, the intellect is stimulated to produce thoughts and to merge them with the observed facts into a thoughtful worldview. Man does this because he wants to intellectually master the sum of observations. An empty thought confronting him weighs on him like an unknown power. He resists this power, overcomes it by making it conceivable. All counting, weighing, and calculating of phenomena also occurs for the same reason. It is the will to power that expresses itself in the drive for knowledge. I have described the process of cognition in detail in my 2 writings, Truth and Science and The Philosophy of Freedom. The dull, weak intellect refuses to admit that it is itself, through its striving for power, that interprets phenomena. It also considers its interpretation to be a matter of fact. And it asks, how does man come to find such a matter of fact in reality? For example, it asks, how is it that the intellect recognizes cause and effect in 2 successive phenomena? All epistemologists from Locke, Hume, Kant to the present day have grappled with this question. The subtleties they have employed in this investigation have remained fruitless. The explanation is given in the human intellect's striving for power. The question is not, are judgments, thoughts about phenomena possible, but rather, does the human intellect need such judgments? Because it needs them, it applies them, and not because they are possible. It is important to grasp that for the purpose of preserving beings of our kind, such judgments must be believed to be true, which is why they could, of course, still be false judgments. Beyond Good and Evil, Expert 11. And we are fundamentally inclined to assert that the falsest judgments are the most indispensable to us, that without allowing for logical fictions, without measuring reality against the purely invented world of the unconditional, the self-same, without a constant falsification of the world by numbers, man could not live, that to renounce false judgments would be to renounce life, a negation of life. Ibid. 4. To anyone who finds this statement paradoxical, Let them reflect on how fruitful the application of geometry to reality is, even though there are nowhere in the world truly geometrically regular lines, surfaces, etc. When the dull, weak intellect realizes that all judgments about things originate from within itself, are produced by it and merged with observations, then it lacks the courage to apply these judgments unreservedly. It says judgments of this kind cannot convey to us any knowledge of the true essence of things. This true essence, therefore, remains inaccessible to our knowledge. In yet another way, the weak intellect seeks to prove that no certainty can be gained through human cognition. It says, man sees, hears, touches things and processes. What he perceives are impressions on his sense organs. When he perceives a color, a sound, he can only say, my eye, my ear are determined in a certain way to perceive color, sound. Man does not perceive something outside of him, but only a determination, a modification of his own organs. In perception, the eye, the ear, etc., are caused to feel in a certain way. They are put into a specific state. Man perceives these states of his own organs as colors, sounds, smells, etc. In all perception, man perceives only his own states. What he calls the external world is composed only of these states of his. It is, therefore, in the true sense, his work. He does not know the things that cause him to spin the external world out of himself, only their effects on his organs. Like a dream dreamt by man which is caused by an unknown, the world appears in this light. If this thought is consistently pursued to its conclusion, it leads to the following corollary. Man knows his organs only insofar as he perceives them. They are members in his world of perception. And man becomes conscious of his own self only insofar as he spins the images of the world out of himself. He perceives dream images, and amidst these dream images, an I past which these dream images float. Every dream image appears in the company of this I. One can also say, every dream image appears within the dream world always in relation to this I. This I adheres to the dream images as a determination, as a quality. It is thus, as a determination of dream images, itself something dreamlike. J.G. Fichte summarizes this view in the words, what arises through knowledge and from knowledge is only knowledge, but all knowledge is only representation, and something is always required in it that corresponds to the image. This requirement cannot be satisfied by any knowledge, and a system of knowledge is necessarily a system of mere images, without all reality, meaning, and purpose. All reality is for Fichte a wonderful dream, without a life of which one dreams, and without a spirit that dreams. A dream which coheres in a dream of itself. The Vocation of Man, Book 2. What is the meaning of this whole train of thought? A weak intellect, unwilling to undertake to give meaning to the world from within itself, seeks this meaning in the world of observations. Naturally, it cannot find it there, because mere observation is devoid of thought. The strong, productive intellect uses its conceptual world to interpret observations. The weak, unproductive intellect declares itself too impotent to do so and says, I can find no meaning in the phenomena of the world. They are mere images passing before me. The meaning of existence must be sought outside, beyond the world of phenomena. Thus, the world of phenomena, i.e., human reality, is declared a dream, an illusion, a nothing, and the true essence of phenomena is sought in a thing in itself, to which no observation reaches, i.e., of which the cognizer can form no conception. This true essence is therefore for the cognizer a completely empty thought, the thought of a nothing. For those philosophers who speak of the thing in itself, the world of phenomena is a dream. Nothing, however, is what they consider the true essence of this world of phenomena. The entire philosophical movement that speaks of the thing in itself, and in modern times relies particularly on Kant, is the belief in nothingness. It is philosophical nihilism. 20. When the strong spirit seeks the cause of human action and accomplishment, it always finds it in the individual personality's will to power. The person with a weak, timid intellect, however, does not want to admit this. They do not feel strong enough to become the master and director of their actions. They interpret the impulses that guide them as commands from an external power. They do not say, I act as I will. Instead, they say, I act according to a command, as I should. They do not want to command. They want to obey. At one stage of development, people regard their impulses to act as commands from God. At another stage, they believe they hear a voice within them that commands them. In the latter case, they do not dare to say, "It is I myself who commands." They assert, "A higher will expresses itself in me." That their conscience tells them in each individual case how they should act is the opinion of one. That a categorical imperative commands them, another asserts. Let us hear what J.G. Fichte says. Something absolutely must happen because it simply must happen. That which conscience now demands of me. I am here for it, solely for it. To recognize it, I have understanding. To accomplish it, I have strength. The Vocation of Man, Book 3. I prefer to quote J.G. Fichte's statements because he has thought through the opinion of the weak and misguided to its ultimate conclusion with iron consistency. What these opinions ultimately lead to can only be recognized if one seeks them where they have been thought through to the end. One cannot rely on the half-hearted, who only think every thought halfway. The source of knowledge is not sought in the individual personality by those who think in the suggested manner. Rather, it is sought beyond this personality in a will in itself. This very will in itself is supposed to speak to the individual as the voice of God, or the voice of conscience, categorical imperative, and so on. It is supposed to be the universal guide of human action and the primary source of morality, and also determine the purposes of moral action. I say, the command of action itself is what, through itself, sets a purpose for me, the same within me that compels me to think that I should act in such a way, compels me to believe that something will result from this action. It opens to the eye the prospect of another world. As I live in obedience, I simultaneously live in the contemplation of its purpose. I live in the better world it promises me. Fichte, The Vocation of Man, Book 3. The one who thinks in this way does not want to set his own goal. He wants to be led to a goal by the higher will he obeys. He wants to rid himself of his own will and become an instrument of higher purposes. In words that are among the most beautiful expressions of the sense of obedience and humility known to me, Fichte describes the surrender to the eternal will in itself. Sublime living will, which no name names and no concept encompasses, well may I raise my spirit to you, for you and I are not separate. Your voice resounds in me, mine resounds back in you, and all my thoughts, if only they are true and good, are thought in you. In you, the incomprehensible, I become comprehensible to myself, and the world becomes perfectly comprehensible to me. All the riddles of my existence are solved, and the most perfect harmony arises in my spirit. I veil my face before you and lay my hand upon my mouth. How you are for yourself, and how you appear to yourself, I can never comprehend, just as certainly as I can never become you yourself. After 1,000 times 1,000 spiritual lives, I will comprehend you just as little as now in this earthly shell. Vocation of Man, Book 3. Where this will ultimately wants to lead man, the individual cannot know. Whoever believes in this will therefore admits that he knows nothing about the ultimate purposes of his actions. However, the goals that the individual creates are not true goals for such a believer in a higher will. He thus replaces the positive individual goals created by the individual with an ultimate purpose for all humanity, the conceptual content of which is, however, nothing. Such a believer is a moral nihilist. He is caught in the worst kind of ignorance imaginable. Nietzsche intended to address this kind of ignorance in a special book of his unfinished work, The Will to Power. Cf. Appendix to Volume 8 of the complete edition of Nietzsche's works. We find the praise of moral nihilism again in Fichte's The Vocation of Man, Book 3. I will not attempt what is denied me by the nature of finitude and what would be of no use to me. How you are in yourself, I do not want to know. But your relations and connections to me, the finite, and to all that is finite, lie open before my eyes. Let me become what I am meant to be, and they surround me in brighter clarity than the consciousness of my own existence. You work in me the knowledge of my duty, of my destiny, in the series of rational beings. How I do not know, nor do I need to know. You know and comprehend what I think and will. How you can know, by what act you bring about this consciousness, of that I understand nothing. Indeed, I even know very well that the concept of an act and of a particular act of consciousness applies only to me but not to you, the infinite. You will, For you will that my free obedience shall have consequences throughout all eternity. The act of your will I do not comprehend, and know only this much, that it is not similar to mine. You do, and your will itself is deed, but your mode of operation is precisely opposite to that which alone I am able to conceive. You live and are, for you know, will and work, omnipresent to finite reason, but you are not as I alone will be able to conceive a being throughout all eternities. Nietzsche counters moral nihilism with the goals that the creative individual will set for itself. To the teachers of resignation, Zarathustra cries, "These teachers of resignation, everywhere where it is small and sick and scabby, they crawl like lice, and only my disgust prevents me from crushing them." Well then, this is my sermon for their ears. I am Zarathustra, the godless, who says, "Who is more godless than I, that I should rejoice in his instruction?" I am Zarathustra, the godless. Where do I find my equal? And all those are my equals, who give themselves their own will and cast off all resignation. 21. The strong personality, which creates goals, is ruthless in their execution. The weak personality, on the other hand, only executes what the will of God, or the voice of conscience, or the categorical imperative says yes to. What corresponds to this yes, the weak person designates as good. What is contrary to this yes, as evil. The strong person cannot acknowledge this good and evil, for they do not acknowledge the power from which the weak person allows their good and evil to be determined. What they, the strong person, want is good for them. They carry it out against all opposing forces. What disturbs them in this execution, they seek to overcome. They do not believe that an eternal world will guides all individual volitional decisions to a great harmony, but they are of the opinion that all human development arises from the volitional impulses of individual personalities, and that an eternal war exists between individual expressions of will, in which the stronger will always triumphs over the weaker. By the weak and cowardly, the strong personality who wants to give themselves law and purpose is designated as evil, as sinful. They arouse fear, for they break through established orders. They call worthless what the weak are accustomed to calling valuable, and they invent new, previously unknown things, which they designate as valuable. Every individual action, every individual way of thinking arouses shudder. It is impossible to calculate what precisely the rarer, more select, more original spirits must have suffered throughout history by always being perceived as evil and dangerous, indeed, that they perceived themselves as such. Under the dominion of morality, originality of every kind has acquired a bad conscience. Up to this moment, the heaven of the best is still darker than it ought to be. Morgenroter 9. The truly free spirit makes absolutely first decisions. The unfree decides according to tradition. Morality is nothing else, and therefore not more, than obedience to customs, whatever these may be. Customs, however, are the traditional way of acting and evaluating. Morgenroter paragraph 9. It is this tradition that is interpreted by moralists as eternal will, categorical imperative. Every tradition, however, is the result of the natural drives and impulses of individual people, entire tribes, peoples, etc. It is just as much the product of natural causes as, for example, the weather conditions of individual regions. The free spirit declares itself not bound by this tradition. It has its individual drives and impulses, and these are no less justified than those of others. It translates these impulses into actions, just as a cloud sends rain to the earth's surface when the causes are present. The free spirit stands beyond what tradition considers good and evil. It creates its own good and evil. When I came to men, I found them sitting on an old conceit. They all thought they had long known what was good and evil for man. All talk of virtue seemed to them an old, weary thing, and whoever wanted to sleep well spoke of good and evil before going to bed. I disturbed this slumber when I taught, what is good and evil no one knows yet, unless it be the Creator. But that is He who creates man's goal and gives meaning and future to the earth. Only He creates it so that something is good and evil. Zarathustra, Part 3 of Old and New Tables. Even when the free spirit acts according to custom, he does so because he wants to make traditional motives his own, and because in certain cases he does not consider it necessary to replace the traditional with something new. 22. The strong seek their life's purpose in the assertion of their creative self. This selfishness distinguishes them from the weak, who see morality in the selfless devotion to what they call good. The weak preach selflessness as the highest virtue, but their selflessness is only the consequence of their lack of creative power. If they had a creative self, they would also want to assert it. The strong love war, for they need war to assert their creations against opposing forces. You shall seek your enemy, you shall wage your war, and for your thoughts. And if your thought succumbs, your honesty shall still triumph over it. You shall love peace as a means to new wars, and the short peace more than the long. I advise you not to work, but to fight. I advise you not to peace, but to victory. Let your work be a fight, your peace a victory. You say that the good cause is what even sanctifies war, but I say to you, it is the good war that sanctifies every cause. War and courage have done more great things than charity. Not your pity, but your bravery has hitherto saved the unfortunate. Zarathustra, Part 1 of War and Warriors. The Creator acts relentlessly and without sparing the resistant. He does not know the virtue of the suffering, pity. The impulses of the Creator come from his strength, not from the feeling of another's suffering. He strives for the triumph of strength, not for the care of the suffering, the weak. Schopenhauer declared the whole world to be a hospital, and actions arising from compassion for the suffering to be the highest virtues. In doing so, he expressed the morality of Christianity in a different form than it does itself. The Creator does not feel called to perform nurse's duties. The capable, the healthy cannot exist for the sake of the weak, the sick. Pity weakens strength, courage, bravery. Pity seeks precisely to preserve what the strong wants to overcome: weakness, suffering. The victory of the strong over the weak is the meaning of all human, as well as all natural, development. Life itself is essentially appropriation, injury, overpowering of the foreign and weaker, suppression, hardness, imposition of one's own forms, incorporation, and at least, at the mildest, exploitation, beyond good and evil, Crowd 259. And if you do not wish to be fates and inexorable, how could you conquer with me? And if your hardness does not wish to flash and sever and cut asunder, how could you one day create with me? For the creators are hard, and it must seem blessed to you to press your hand upon millennia as upon wax, blessed to write upon the will of millennia as upon bronze. Harder than bronze, nobler than bronze. Only the noblest is entirely hard. This new tablet, O my brothers, I place above you, become hard. Zarathustra, Part 3 of Old and New Tablets. The free spirit makes no claim to pity. Whoever would pity him, he would have to ask, do you consider me so weak that I cannot bear my suffering myself? Every pity goes against his shame. Nietzsche illustrates the strong person's aversion to pity in the fourth part of his Zarathustra. Zarathustra, on his wanderings, comes to a valley called Serpent's Death. No living creature is found here. Only a kind of ugly green snake comes here to die. This valley has been sought out by the ugliest man. He does not want to be seen by any creature because of his ugliness. In this valley, no one sees him except God, but he cannot bear even God's gaze. The awareness that God's eyes penetrate all spaces is a burden to him. He has therefore killed God, i.e., he has killed the belief in God within himself. He has become an atheist because of his ugliness. When Zarathustra sees this man, he is once again overcome by what he believes to have forever eradicated within himself: pity for the terrible ugliness. This is a temptation for Zarathustra, but he soon rejects the feeling of pity and becomes hard again. The ugliest man says to him, "Your hardness honors my ugliness. I am too rich in ugliness to endure anyone's pity." Pity goes against shame. Whoever needs pity cannot stand alone, and the free spirit wants to be entirely self-reliant. The weak are not satisfied with the demonstration of the natural will to power as the cause of human actions. They do not merely seek natural connections in human development, but they seek the relationship of human actions to what they call the will in itself, the eternal moral world order. Whoever acts contrary to this world order, they ascribe guilt to them. And they are not content with merely evaluating an action by its natural consequences, but they demand that a guilty action also entail moral consequences, punishments. They call themselves guilty if they do not find their actions in accordance with the moral world order. They turn away with disgust from the source of evil within themselves and call this feeling bad conscience. The strong personality does not accept any of these concepts. They are only concerned with the natural consequences of their actions. They ask, how much is my way of acting worth for life? Does it correspond to what I wanted? The strong person can grieve if an action fails, if the result does not correspond to their intentions. But they do not accuse themselves, for they do not measure their way of acting by supernatural standards. They know that they act according to their natural impulses, and can at most regret that these are not better. They deal with the evaluation of others' actions in the same way. They know no moral evaluation of actions. They are immoralists. What tradition labels as evil, the immoralist views as an outflow of human instincts, just like the good. Punishment, to him, is not morally conditioned, but merely a means to eradicate instincts in certain individuals that are harmful to others. According to the immoralist, society does not punish because it has a moral right to atone for guilt, but solely because it proves stronger than the individual who possesses instincts contrary to the collective. The power of society stands against the power of the individual. This is the natural connection between an individual's evil act and society's jurisdiction and punishment of that individual. It is the will to power, i.e., the actualization of those instincts present in the majority of people, that manifests itself in a society's administration of justice. Every punishment is the victory of a majority over an individual. If the individual were to triumph over society, then their actions would have to be labeled as good, and those of the others as evil. The prevailing law merely expresses what society currently recognizes as the best foundation for its will to power. 24. Because Nietzsche sees human action as merely an outflow of instincts, and these instincts differ among various people, it seems necessary to him that their actions also differ. Nietzsche is therefore a decided opponent of the democratic principle, equal rights and equal duties for all. People are unequal, therefore their rights and duties must also be unequal. The natural course of world history will always feature strong and weak, creative and unproductive people, and the strong will always be called upon to determine the goals for the weak. Even more, the strong will use the weak as a means to an end, i.e., as slaves. Nietzsche, of course, does not speak of a moral right of the strong to keep slaves. He does not recognize moral rights. Instead, he believes that the overcoming of the weaker by the stronger, which he considers the principle of all life, must necessarily lead to slavery. It is also natural for the vanquished to rebel against the vanquisher. If this rebellion cannot express itself through action, it expresses itself at least in feeling. And the expression of this feeling is revenge, which always dwells in the hearts of those who have been overcome in some way by the better endowed. Nietzsche sees the modern social democratic movement as an outflow of this revenge. The victory of this movement would, to him, be an elevation of the failures, the ill-fated, at the expense of the better. Nietzsche strives for precisely the opposite, the cultivation of the strong, self-reliant personality, and he hates the craving that seeks to equalize everything and make sovereign individuality disappear into the sea of general mediocrity. Not everyone should have and enjoy the same things, Nietzsche believes, but rather everyone should have and enjoy what they can achieve according to their personal strength. 25. What a person is worth depends solely on the value of their instincts. The value of a person cannot be determined by anything else. People speak of the value of work. Work is supposed to ennoble a person, but work itself has no value at all. Only by serving humanity does it acquire value. Only insofar as work presents itself as a natural consequence of human inclinations is it worthy of a person. Whoever makes themselves a servant of work debases themselves. Only the person who cannot determine their own value seeks to measure this value by the magnitude of their work. It is characteristic of modern democratic bourgeoisie that it bases its assessment of a person's worth on their work. Even Goethe is not free from this sentiment. Indeed, he lets his Faust find complete satisfaction in the consciousness of work accomplished. 26. Even art, in Nietzsche's opinion, only has value if it serves the life of the individual. Here, too, Nietzsche champions the strong personality and rejects everything that weak instincts might express about art. Almost all German aestheticians hold the viewpoint of weak instincts. Art is supposed to represent an infinite in the finite, an eternal in the temporal, an idea in reality. For Schelling, for example, all sensual beauty is merely a reflection of that infinite beauty which we can never perceive with our senses. The artwork is not beautiful for its own sake or by virtue of what it is, but because it depicts the idea of beauty. The sensual image is merely a means of expression, merely the form for a supersensual content, and Hegel calls beauty the sensual shining of the idea. Similar sentiments can be found among other German aestheticians. For Nietzsche, art is a life-affirming element, and only when it is so does it have justification. Whoever cannot endure life as they directly perceive it, reshapes it according to their needs, and thereby creates a work of art. And what does the connoisseur want from a work of art? They want an enhancement of their joy of life, a strengthening of their vital forces, the satisfaction of needs that reality does not fulfill. But if their mind is directed towards the real, they do not want to glimpse the reflection of the divine, the ethereal, through the artwork. Let us hear how Nietzsche describes the impression Bizet's Carmen made on him. I become a better person when this Bizet speaks to me, also a better musician, a better listener. Can one even listen better? I bury my ears under this music. I hear its cause. It seems to me that I experience its genesis. I tremble with dangers that accompany some venture. I am delighted by strokes of luck for which Bizet is innocent. And strangely, fundamentally, I don't think about it, or know how much I think about it. For entirely different thoughts run through my head during it. Has it been noticed that music frees the spirit, gives wings to the scholar, that one becomes more of a philosopher the more one becomes a musician? The gray sky of abstraction as if pierced by lightning, the light strong enough for all the filigree of things, the great problems close enough to grasp, the world surveyed as if from a mountain. I just defined the philosophical pathos, and suddenly answers fall into my lap, a small hail of ice and wisdom, of solved problems. Where am I? Bizet makes me fertile. Everything good makes me fertile. I have no other gratitude. I also have no other proof of what is good. The case of Wagnerstrophe 1. Because Richard Wagner's music did not have such an effect on him, Nietzsche rejected it. My objections to Wagner's music are physiological objections. My fact, my petit favre, is that I no longer breathe easily when this music begins to affect me, that my foot immediately becomes angry and revolts against it. It needs rhythm, dance, march. It demands from music first and foremost the delights that lie in good walking, striding, dancing. But does not my stomach also protest? My heart, my circulation? Do not my intestines become saddened? Do I not suddenly become hoarse from it? And so I ask myself, what does my whole body really want from music at all? I believe it's relief, as if all animal functions should be accelerated by light, bold, exuberant, self-confident rhythms, as if the iron-leaden life should lose its heaviness through golden, tender, oil-like melodies. My melancholy wants to rest in the hiding places and abysses of perfection. For that I need music. Nietzsche contra Wagner. Chapter, Where I Object. In the beginning of his literary career, Nietzsche was mistaken about what his instincts demanded from art, which is why he was a follower of Wagner at the time. He allowed himself to be led astray into idealism by studying Schopenhauer's philosophy. For a time, he believed in idealism and feigned artificial, ideal needs. Only later in life did he realize that all idealism was directly contrary to his drives. He then became more honest with himself. He expressed what he truly felt, and that could only lead to a complete rejection of Wagner's music, which increasingly adopted the ascetic character we have already identified as a hallmark of Wagner's ultimate goal. Aestheticians who assign art the task of giving sensible form to the idea, of embodying the divine, hold a view similar to philosophical nihilists in the realm of knowledge and morality. They seek in art objects a transcendent quality that, however, dissolves into nothingness when confronted with a sense of reality. There is also an aesthetic nihilism. Opposite to this stands the aesthetic of the strong personality, which sees in art a reflection of reality, a higher reality that man enjoys more than everyday life. 27. Nietzsche contrasts two types of people, the weak and the strong. The former seeks knowledge as an objective fact that should flow into his mind from the external world. He allows his good and evil to be dictated by an eternal world will, or a categorical imperative. He labels every action not determined by this world will, but only by creative self-will, as sin, which must entail moral punishment. He wants to decree equal rights for all people and determine human worth by an external standard. Finally, he wants to see in art a reflection of the divine, a message from the beyond. The strong, on the other hand, views all knowledge as an expression of the will to power. Through knowledge, he seeks to make things conceivable and thereby subject to him. He knows that he himself is the creator of truth, that no one but himself can create his good and evil. He regards human actions as consequences of natural drives and accepts them as natural events that are never to be considered sins and do not deserve moral condemnation. He seeks human worth in the excellence of his instincts. He values a person with instincts for health, spirit, beauty, endurance, nobility, higher than one with instincts for weakness, ugliness, slavery. He judges a work of art by the degree to which it contributes to the enhancement of his powers. This latter type of person is what Nietzsche means by his Übermensch. Such Übermenschen could hitherto only arise through the confluence of accidental circumstances. Zarathustra's intention is to make their development the conscious goal of humanity. Until now, the goal of human development has been seen in various ideals. Here, Nietzsche considers a change in perspective necessary. The higher type has often enough been there, but as a stroke of luck, as an exception, never as willed. Rather, he has been most feared, he was almost the terrible. And out of fear, the opposite type was willed, bred, achieved. The domestic animal, the herd animal, the sick animal man, the Christian, Antichrist, 3. Zarathustra's wisdom is to teach this Übermensch, to whom that other type is merely a transition. Nietzsche calls this wisdom Dionysian. It is a wisdom not given to man from without. It is a self-created wisdom. The Dionysian sage does not research, he creates. He does not stand as an observer outside the world he wishes to know, he has become one with his knowledge. He does not search for a god. Whatever he can still imagine as divine is only himself as the creator of his own world. When this state extends to all the powers of the human organism, it gives rise to the Dionysian man, to whom it is impossible not to understand any suggestion. He overlooks no sign of effect. He possesses the highest degree of understanding and divining instinct, just as he possesses the highest degree of communicative art. He enters into every skin, every effect. He constantly transforms himself. Opposed to the Dionysian sage is the mere observer, who always believes himself to be outside his objects of knowledge, as an objective, passive spectator. Opposed to the Dionysian man is the Apollonian, who above all keeps the eye stimulated so that it gains the power of vision. Visions, images of things that lie beyond human reality, are what the Apollonian spirit strives for, not a wisdom created by himself. 28. Apollonian wisdom has the character of seriousness. It perceives the dominion of the beyond, which it possesses only in images, as a heavy pressure, as a power resisting it. Apollonian wisdom is serious, for it believes itself to be in possession of knowledge from the beyond, even if this is only to be mediated through images, visions. Heavily burdened with his knowledge, the Apollonian spirit walks along, for he carries a burden that originates from another world, and he assumes an expression of dignity, for before the manifestations of the infinite, all laughter must fall silent. This laughter, however, characterizes the Dionysian spirit. He knows that everything he calls wisdom is only his wisdom, invented by him to make life easy for himself. This alone is what his wisdom should be, a means that allows him to say yes to life. The Dionysian man finds the spirit of gravity repulsive because it does not lighten life but oppresses it. Self-created wisdom is a cheerful wisdom, for he who creates his own burden creates only one that he can also carry lightly. With self-created wisdom, the Dionysian spirit moves lightly through the world like a dancer. But that I am good to wisdom, and often too good, that makes her remind me very much of life. She has her eye, her laughter, and even her golden fishing rod. What can I do if the two look so alike? Into your eye I recently gazed, O life. Gold I saw glinting in your night eye. My heart stood still with this delight. A golden skiff I saw glinting on night waters, a sinking, drinking, again beckoning golden rocking skiff. At my foot, the dance-mad one, you cast a glance, a laughing, questioning, melting, rocking glance. Only twice did you shake your rattle with small hands. Then my foot rocked with dance madness. My heels reared up, my toes listened to understand you. But the dancer carries his ear in his toes. Zarathustra Parts 2 and 3, The Dance Songs. 29. Because the Dionysian spirit draws all the impulses for its actions from within itself and obeys no external power, it is a free spirit. For a free spirit is one that only follows its own nature. However, in Nietzsche's works, only instincts are mentioned as the impulses of the free spirit. I believe that here Nietzsche has summarized a series of impulses under one name, which require a more detailed consideration. Nietzsche calls instincts both the drives for nourishment and self-preservation found in animals, as well as the highest impulses of human nature, e.g. the drive for knowledge, the drive to act according to moral standards, the drive to delight in works of art, etc. Now, all these drives are indeed manifestations of one and the same fundamental force, but they nevertheless represent different stages in the development of this force. Moral impulses, for example, are a particular stage of instincts. Even if it can be conceded that they are only higher forms of sensual instincts, they nevertheless come into existence in humans in a particular way. This is shown by the fact that it is possible for humans to perform actions that cannot be directly traced back to sensual instincts, but only to those impulses that are to be described as higher forms of instinct. Humans create impulses for their actions that cannot be derived from their sensual drives, but only from conscious thought. They set themselves individual goals, but they set these goals consciously. And there is a great difference whether they follow an unconsciously arisen instinct that was only later taken into consciousness, or a thought that they produced from the outset with full consciousness. If I eat because my drive for food urges me, this is something essentially different from when I solve a mathematical problem. The thinking apprehension of world phenomena represents a special form of general perception. It differs from mere sensual perception. For humans, the higher developmental forms of instinctual life are now just as natural as the lower ones. If both are not in harmony, then they are condemned to unfreedom. It can happen that a weak personality with perfectly healthy sensual instincts has only weak spiritual instincts. Then, in terms of their sensual life, they will indeed unfold their own individuality, but they will borrow the intellectual impulses for their actions from tradition. A disharmony between both worlds of drives can arise. The sensual drives urge the living out of one's own personality, while the spiritual impulses are under the spell of an external authority. The spiritual life of such a personality is tyrannized by the sensual, and the sensual life by the spiritual instincts. For both powers do not belong together, are not grown from one essence. Therefore, a truly free personality requires not only a healthy, developed individual, sensual, instinctual life, but also the ability to create the intellectual impulses for life. Only that person is completely free who can also produce thoughts that lead to action. I have called the faculty of creating purely intellectual springs of action moral fantasy in my work The Philosophy of Freedom, Weimar, Emil Felber, 1894. Only those who have this moral fantasy are truly free, because humans must act according to conscious springs of action, and if they cannot produce such themselves, then they must let themselves be given them by external authorities or by tradition speaking within them in the form of the voice of conscience. A person who merely gives in to their sensual instincts acts like an animal. A person who subordinates their sensual instincts to foreign thoughts acts unfreely. Only the person who creates their own moral goals acts freely. Moral fantasy is missing in Nietzsche's explanations. Whoever thinks his thoughts to the end must necessarily arrive at this concept. But on the other hand, it is also an absolute necessity that this concept be integrated into Nietzsche's worldview. Otherwise, it could always be objected against it. Although the Dionysian human is not a slave to tradition or to the will from beyond, they are a slave to their own instincts. Nietzsche focused on what is original and uniquely personal in human beings. He sought to liberate this personal essence from the cloak of the impersonal, in which a reality-averse worldview had shrouded it. However, he did not manage to differentiate the stages of life within the personality itself. Consequently, he underestimated the significance of consciousness for human personality. Consciousness is the latest and most recent development of the organic, and therefore also the most unfinished and weakest part of it. From consciousness spring countless errors which cause an animal, a human being, to perish sooner than necessary, over fate, as Homer says. If the preserving bond of instincts were not so immeasurably much more powerful, if it did not serve as a regulator overall, humanity would perish due to its misguided judgments and fantasies with open eyes, its superficiality and gullibility, in short, precisely due to its consciousness, says Nietzsche, The Gay Science, Pryk, 11. This must certainly be conceded, but no less true is it that man is only free insofar as he can create intellectual motives for his actions within consciousness. Yet the consideration of intellectual motives leads even further. It is an empirical fact that these intellectual motives, which people produce from within themselves, show a certain degree of agreement among individuals. Even when an individual freely creates thoughts from within, these thoughts align in some way with those of other people. From this, the free individual derives the right to assume that harmony in human society will naturally emerge if it consists of sovereign individuals. He can contrast this opinion with that of the defender of unfreedom, who believes that the actions of a majority of people only align if they are guided toward a common goal by an external force. The free spirit is therefore by no means a proponent of the view that animalistic urges should reign absolutely free, and thus all legal orders should be abolished. But he demands absolute freedom for those who do not merely want to follow their animal instincts, but who are capable of creating moral motives, their own good and evil. Only those who have not sufficiently grasped Nietzsche to draw the ultimate consequences of his worldview, even though Nietzsche himself did not draw them, can see in him a person who, with a certain stylistic voluptuousness, found the courage to reveal what may have lurked hidden in the innermost soul of grandiose criminal types. Ludwig Stein, Friedrich Nietzsche's Worldview and Its Dangers, p. 5. The average education of a German professor is still not advanced enough to separate the greatness of a personality from its minor errors. Otherwise, one would not witness such a professor's criticism being directed precisely at these minor errors. I believe true education embraces the greatness of a personality and corrects minor errors or completes unfinished thoughts. 3. Nietzsche's course of development, 30. I have presented Nietzsche's views on the Übermensch as they appear in his later writings. Zarathustra, 1883–1884, Beyond Good and Evil, 1886, On the Genealogy of Morality, 1887, The Case of Wagner, 1888, Twilight of the Idols, 1889. In the unfinished work, The Will to Power, attempt at a revaluation of all values, the first part of which, Antichrist, appeared in the 8th volume of the complete edition, they would likely have found their most philosophically concise expression. This is clearly discernible from the disposition printed in the appendix to the aforementioned volume. It is titled, 1. The Antichrist, an attempt at a critique of Christianity. 2. The Free Spirit, critique of philosophy as a nihilistic movement. 3. The Immoralist, critique of the most fatal kind of ignorance, morality. 4. Dionysus, philosophy of eternal recurrence. Nietzsche did not express his thoughts in their most authentic form at the very beginning of his literary career. He was initially influenced by German idealism, particularly in the form represented by Schopenhauer and Richard Wagner. He expresses himself in Schopenhauerian and Wagnerian formulas in his early writings. However, whoever is able to look beyond these formulas to the core of Nietzsche's thoughts will find in these writings the same intentions and goals that are expressed in his later works. One cannot speak of Nietzsche's development without being reminded of the freest thinker that modern humanity has produced, Max Stirner. It is a sad truth that this thinker, who in the fullest sense corresponds to what Nietzsche demands of the Superman, has only been recognized and appreciated by a few. He already expressed Nietzsche's worldview in the 1840s of this century. Not, of course, in such rich, heartfelt tones as Nietzsche, but in crystal-clear thoughts, beside which Nietzsche's aphorisms often appear as mere stammering. What path would Nietzsche have taken if not Schopenhauer, but Max Stirner had been his educator? There is no trace of Stirner's influence in Nietzsche's writings. Nietzsche had to struggle, by his own strength, out of German idealism to an understanding of the world similar to Stirner's. Like Nietzsche, Stirner is of the opinion that the driving forces of human life can only be sought in the individual, actual personality. He rejects all powers that seek to shape and determine the individual personality from outside. He traces the course of world history and finds the fundamental error of humanity to date in the fact that it has not set itself the cultivation and culture of the individual personality, but other, impersonal goals and purposes. He sees the true liberation of man in the fact that man does not grant any higher reality to such goals, but uses these goals as means for his self-cultivation. The free man determines his own purposes. He possesses his ideals. He does not let himself be possessed by them. The man who does not rule over his ideals as a free personality is under their influence, like the madman who suffers from fixed ideas. For Stirner, it is all the same whether a man imagines himself to be the king of China, or whether a comfortable citizen imagines it is his destiny to be a good Christian, a devout Protestant, a loyal citizen, a virtuous man, etc. That is both one and the same fixed idea. Whoever has never tried and dared not to be a good Christian, a devout Protestant, a virtuous man, etc., is imprisoned and prejudiced in his devoutness, virtuousness, etc. One only needs to read a few sentences from Stirner's book, The Ego and Its Own, to see how akin his view is to Nietzsche's. I will quote some passages from this book that are particularly characteristic of Stirner's way of thinking. Pre-Christian and Christian times pursue opposing goals. The former wants to idealize the real, the latter to realize the ideal. The former seeks the Holy Spirit, the latter the transfigured body. Therefore, the former concludes with insensitivity to the real, with contempt for the world. The latter will end with the rejection of the ideal, with contempt for the spirit. Just as the trend of sanctification or purification runs through the ancient world, ablutions, etc., so that of embodiment runs through the Christian. God plunges into this world, becomes flesh and wants to redeem it, i.e., fill it with himself. But since he is the idea or the spirit, the idea is finally introduced into everything, into the world, e.g. by Hegel, and it is proven that the idea, reason, is in everything. What the pagan Stoics set up as the wise man corresponds in modern culture to man, both of them bodiless beings. The unreal wise man, this disembodied saint of the Stoics, became a real person, a bodily saint in the incarnate God. The unreal man, the disembodied ego, will become real in the corporeal ego, in me. That the individual is a world history in himself, and possesses his own property in the rest of world history, that goes beyond Christianity. For the Christian, world history is the higher, because it is the history of Christ or of man. For the egoist, only his history has value, because he only wants to develop himself, not the idea of humanity, not God's plan, not the intentions of providence, not freedom, and the like. He does not see himself as a tool of the idea or a vessel of God. He recognizes no calling. He does not imagine that he exists for the further development of humanity and must contribute his might to it, but he lives himself out, unconcerned about how well or how badly humanity fares in the process. If it did not allow for the misunderstanding that a state of nature should be praised, one could recall Lenau's Three Gypsies. What am I in the world to realize ideas? To perhaps do my part for the realization of the idea of the state through my citizenship, or through marriage as a spouse and father, to bring the idea of the family into existence. What do such callings matter to me? I live by a calling as little as a flower grows and smells by a calling. The ideal man is realized when the Christian view turns into the statement, I, this unique one, am man. The conceptual question, what is man, has then transformed into the personal one, who is man? With what one sought the concept to realize it, with who it is no longer a question at all, but the answer is immediately personally present in the questioner. The question answers itself. They say of God, Names do not name you. That applies to me. No concept expresses me. Nothing that is given as my essence exhausts me. They are only names. Likewise, they say of God that he is perfect and has no calling to strive for perfection. That also applies only to me. I am the owner of my power, and I am so when I know myself as the unique one. In the unique one, even the owner returns to his creative nothingness from which he is born. Every higher being above me, be it God, be it man, weakens the feeling of my uniqueness and pales before the sun of this consciousness. If I place my cause on me, the unique one, then it stands on its perishable mortal creator, who consumes himself, and I may say, I have set my cause on nothing. This owner, who relies on himself and creates only from within himself, is Nietzsche's Übermensch. 31. These Stirnerian thoughts would have been the suitable vessel into which Nietzsche could have poured his rich emotional life. Instead, he sought in Schopenhauer's conceptual world the ladder on which he climbed to his world of thought. According to Schopenhauer, all our knowledge of the world stems from two roots, from the life of representation and from the perception of the will, which appears in us as an agent. The thing in itself lies beyond the world of our representation. For representation is only the effect that the thing in itself exerts on my organ of knowledge. I know only the impressions that things make on me, not the things themselves. And these impressions are precisely my representations. I know no sun and no earth, but only an eye that sees a sun and a hand that feels an earth. Man knows only that the world which surrounds him exists only as representation, i.e., entirely in relation to another, the representer, which he himself is. Schopenhauer, World as Will and Representation, Prof. 1. But man does not merely represent the world, he also acts within it. He becomes aware of his will, and he experiences that which he feels within himself, as will can be perceived externally as the movement of his body, i.e., man perceives his own action doubly, from within as representation, from without as will. Schopenhauer concludes from this that it is the will itself that appears as representation in the perceived bodily action. And he then further asserts that not only the representation of one's own body and its movements is based on a will, but that this is also the case with all other representations. The whole world is, therefore, according to Schopenhauer's view, essentially will and appears to our intellect as representation. This will, Schopenhauer further asserts, is unitary in all things. Only our intellect causes us to perceive a multitude of particular things. According to this view, man, through his will, is connected with the unified world being. Insofar as man acts, the unified primal will acts within him. As an individual, particular personality, man exists only in his own imagination. In essence, he is identical with the unified ground of the world. Let us assume that in Nietzsche, when he became acquainted with Schopenhauer's philosophy, the idea of the Superman was already unconsciously, instinctively present. In that case, this doctrine of the will could only have resonated with him. In the human will, he found an element that allowed man to participate directly in the creation of the world's content. As a willing being, man is not merely an observer standing outside the world's content, forming images of reality, but he is himself a creator. Within him reigns the divine power, beyond which there is no other. 32. From these views, Nietzsche developed the two ideas of Apollonian and Dionysian world contemplation. He applied them to Greek artistic life, which he accordingly saw as arising from two roots, an art of imagining and an art of willing. When the imaginer idealizes his world of imagination and embodies his idealized imaginings in works of art, Apollonian art emerges. By imprinting beauty upon individual objects of imagination, he bestows upon them the semblance of the eternal, but he remains within the world of imagination. The Dionysian artist seeks not only to express beauty in his works of art, but he himself imitates the creative activity of the world will. He seeks to depict the world spirit in his own movements. He makes himself the visible embodiment of the will. He becomes a work of art himself. Singing and dancing, man expresses himself as a member of a higher community. He has forgotten how to walk and speak and is on the verge of flying into the air, dancing. Enchantment speaks from his gestures. Birth of Tragedy, Struck 1. In this state, man forgets himself. He no longer feels himself as an individual. He allows the general world will to prevail within him. In this way, Nietzsche interprets the festivals organized in honor of the god Dionysus by his devotees. In the Dionysian devotee, Nietzsche sees the archetype of the Dionysian artist. Now he imagines that the oldest dramatic art of the Greeks arose from a higher union of the Dionysian with the Apollonian. In this way, he explains the origin of the first Greek tragedy. He assumes that tragedy originated from the tragic chorus. The Dionysian man becomes a spectator, an observer of an image that represents himself. The chorus is the self-reflection of a Dionysian-inspired man, i.e., the Dionysian man sees his Dionysian excitement depicted through an Apollonian work of art. The representation of the Dionysian in the Apollonian image is primitive tragedy. A prerequisite for such a tragedy is that its creator possesses a living consciousness of man's connection with the primal forces of the world. Such a consciousness expresses itself as myth. The mythical must be the subject of the oldest tragedy. If, in the development of a people, the time comes when corrosive reason destroys the living feeling for myth, then the death of the tragic is the necessary consequence. 33. In the development of Hellenism, according to Nietzsche, this moment arrived with Socrates. Socrates was an enemy of all instinctive life, allied with the forces of nature. He only accepted what reason could prove through thought, what was teachable. This declared war on myth, and Euripides, whom Nietzsche designated as a student of Socrates, destroyed tragedy because his creation no longer sprang, like that of Aeschylus, from Dionysian instincts, but from critical reason. Instead of the imitation of the world spirit's will movements, Euripides presents the rational linking of individual events within the tragic action. I am not asking for the historical justification of these Nietzschean ideas. He has been sharply attacked by a classical philologist because of them. Nietzsche's description of Greek culture can be compared to a person's depiction of a landscape viewed from a mountaintop, a philological description to a description given by a wanderer who visits every single spot. From the mountain, some things shift according to the laws of optics. 34. What matters here is the question: what task did Nietzsche set for himself in his Birth of Tragedy? Nietzsche believes that the ancient Greeks were very well acquainted with the sufferings of existence. There is an old legend that King Midas hunted the wise Silenus, the companion of Dionysus, in the forest for a long time without catching him. When he finally fell into his hands, the king asked what was best and most excellent for man. The demon remained rigid and motionless until, forced by the king, he finally burst out with a shrill laugh into these words: "Miserable ephemeral race, children of chance and toil, why do you force me to tell you what is most beneficial for you not to hear? The very best is entirely unattainable for you, not to be born, not to be nothing. But the second best for you is to die soon." Birth of Tragedy, 3. In this legend, Nietzsche finds a fundamental sentiment of the Greeks expressed. He considers it superficial to portray the Greeks as a constantly cheerful, childishly playful people. From this tragic fundamental sentiment, the Greeks must have felt an urge to create something that would make existence bearable. They sought a justification for existence, and found it in their world of gods and in art. Only through the counter-image of the Olympian gods and art did the harsh reality become bearable for the Greeks. The fundamental question in the Birth of Tragedy for Nietzsche is therefore, in what way has Greek art been life-promoting, life-sustaining? Nietzsche's basic instinct thus asserts itself in this first work as a life-promoting power in relation to art. 35. Another of Nietzsche's basic instincts can already be observed in this work. It is the aversion to merely logical minds, whose personality is completely dominated by their intellect. From this aversion stems Nietzsche's opinion that the Socratic spirit is the destroyer of Greek culture. For Nietzsche, the logical is only a form in which personality expresses itself. If no other modes of expression are added to this form, the personality appears as a cripple, as an organism with mutilated essential organs. Because Nietzsche could only discover the brooding intellect in Kant's writings, he calls Kant a misshapen concept cripple. Nietzsche only accepts logic if it is the expression of the deeper fundamental instincts of a personality. It must be an emanation of the supralogical in the personality. Nietzsche always adhered to the rejection of the Socratic spirit. We read in Twilight of the Idols, with Socrates, Greek taste turns in favor of dialectics. What actually happens then? Above all, a noble taste is defeated. The rabble comes out on top with dialectics. Before Socrates, dialectical manners were rejected in good society. They were considered bad manners. They exposed the problem of Socrates. 5. Where strong fundamental instincts do not speak for a cause, the proving intellect steps in and seeks to support it through the arts of advocacy. 36. Nietzsche believed he recognized a renewer of the Dionysian spirit in Richard Wagner. Out of this belief, he wrote the fourth of his untimely meditations, Richard Wagner in Bayreuth, 1875. At this time, he still adhered to the interpretation of the Dionysian spirit that he had formed in accordance with Schopenhauer's philosophy. He still believed that reality was merely human representation, and that beyond this world of representation, the essence of things lay in the form of the primordial will. And the creative Dionysian spirit was not yet for him the self-creating, but the self-forgetting human being, absorbed in the primordial will. Wagner's music dramas were for him images of the prevailing primordial will, created by a Dionysian spirit devoted to this primordial will. And since Schopenhauer saw music as a direct reflection of the will, Nietzsche also believed he should see music as the best means of expression for a Dionysian creative spirit. The language of civilized peoples seemed diseased to him. It can no longer be the simple expression of feelings, because words gradually had to be used more and more to express the increasing intellectual development of humans. As a result, however, the meaning of words has become abstract and impoverished. They can no longer express what the Dionysian spirit, creating from the primal will, feels. This spirit can therefore no longer express itself in word drama. It must call upon other means of expression, especially music, but also the other arts. The Dionysian spirit becomes the dithyrambic dramatist, this concept taken so fully that it simultaneously encompasses the actor, poet, and musician. However one may imagine the development of the primal dramatist, in his maturity and perfection, he is a creation without any hindrance or gap, the truly free artist who cannot but think in all arts at once, the mediator and reconciler between seemingly separate spheres, the restorer of a unity and totality of artistic capacity, which cannot be guessed at or inferred, but only shown through action. Richard Wagner in Bayreuth, 7. Nietzsche revered Richard Wagner as a Dionysian spirit, and only in the sense indicated by Nietzsche in the aforementioned work can Wagner be called a Dionysian spirit. His instincts are directed towards the beyond. He wants to let the voice of the beyond resonate through his music. I have already pointed out, p81f, that Nietzsche later found himself and was able to recognize his instincts, directed towards the here and now, in their unique character. He had originally misunderstood Wagner's art because he had misunderstood himself, because he had allowed his instincts to be tyrannized by Schopenhauer's philosophy. This subordination of his instincts to an alien spiritual power later appeared to him like a disease process. He found that he had not listened to his instincts and had allowed himself to be misled by an inappropriate opinion, letting an art act upon these instincts that could only be detrimental to them, that had to make them sick. Nietzsche himself described the influence that Schopenhauer's philosophy, which contradicted his basic instincts, had on him in his third, untimely meditations. Schopenhauer as educator, 1873, at a time when he still believed in this philosophy. Nietzsche was looking for an educator. The right educator can only be one who acts upon the student in such a way that the student's innermost essence develops out of their personality. Every person is influenced by their time and its cultural means. They absorb what their era offers in terms of educational material. But the question is how they can find themselves amidst this external influx, how they can spin out of themselves what they and only they and no one else can be. The person who does not want to belong to the crowd only needs to stop being comfortable with themselves. They should follow their conscience, which calls out to them, "Be yourself. You are not all that you are doing, thinking, desiring now. So speaks the person to themselves who one day finds that they have always only contented themselves with absorbing educational material from outside. Schopenhauer as educator, Prac 1. Nietzsche found himself, even if initially not yet in his most unique form, through the study of Schopenhauer's philosophy. Nietzsche unconsciously strived to express himself simply and honestly, according to his basic instincts. He found only people around him who expressed themselves in the educational formulas of the time, who veiled their own essence through these formulas. In Schopenhauer, however, Nietzsche found a person who had the courage to make his personal feelings about the world the content of his philosophy, the vigorous well-being of the speaker. Enveloped Nietzsche upon first reading Schopenhauer's sentences. Here is an always uniform invigorating air we feel. Here is a certain inimitable unself-consciousness and naturalness, such as people have who are at home with themselves, and indeed masters in a very rich house, in contrast to those writers who are most surprised when they are once witty, and whose presentation thereby acquires something restless and unnatural. Schopenhauer speaks with himself, or if one absolutely wants to imagine a listener, then one should imagine the son whom the father instructs. It is an honest, robust, good-natured expression before a listener who listens with love, Schopenhauer Graph 2. That he heard a person speaking according to their innermost instincts, that was what drew Nietzsche to Schopenhauer. Nietzsche saw in Schopenhauer a strong personality, one who is not transformed into a mere intellectual by philosophy, but who makes the logical merely an expression of the superlogical, the instinctive within himself. The longing for a strong nature, for healthy and simple humanity, was for him a longing for himself, and as soon as he had conquered time within himself, he also had to, with astonished eyes, behold the genius within himself. Schopenhauer 3. In Nietzsche's mind, the striving for the idea of the Superman, who seeks himself as the meaning of his existence, was already at work, and he found such a seeker in Schopenhauer. In such people, he sees the purpose, indeed the sole purpose, of worldly existence achieved. Nature seems to him to have reached a goal when it has produced such a person. Nature, which never jumps, here makes its only jump, and indeed a leap of joy, for it feels for the first time at its goal, namely, where it understands that it must unlearn to have goals. Chopin, Puff 5. In this sentence lies the germ of the conception of the Superman. When he wrote this sentence, Nietzsche already wanted exactly the same thing he later wanted with his Zarathustra, but he still lacked the strength to express this will in his own language. Even when he wrote his book on Schopenhauer, he already saw the fundamental idea of culture in the creation of the Superman. 38. Nietzsche thus sees the goal of all human development in the cultivation of the individual's personal instincts. Anything that hinders this development appears to him as the gravest sin against humanity. However, there is something within humans that naturally resists their free development. Humans are not solely determined by the impulses active within them at any given moment, but also by everything that has accumulated in their memory. Humans recall their own experiences. They seek to acquire an awareness of the experiences of their people, tribe, and indeed all of humanity through the study of history. Humans are historical beings. Animals live ahistorically. They follow the impulses that act within them at a particular moment. Humans are determined by their past. If they want to undertake something, they ask themselves, what experiences have I or someone else already had with a similar undertaking? The impetus for an action can be completely extinguished by the memory of an experience. For Nietzsche, observing this fact raises the question, to what extent does human memory promote life, and to what extent does it have a detrimental effect? Memory, which also seeks to encompass things that humans have not experienced themselves, lives within them as a historical sense, as the study of the past. Nietzsche asks, to what extent does the historical sense promote life? He seeks to answer this question in his second, untimely meditation, On the Use and Disadvantage of History for Life, 1843. The occasion for this writing was Nietzsche's observation that the historical sense had become a prominent characteristic among his contemporaries, especially among scholars. Nietzsche found the immersion in the past praised everywhere. Only through knowledge of the past, it was believed, could humans distinguish what was possible and what was impossible for them. This creed rang in his ears. Only those who know how a people has developed can assess what is beneficial for its future. This cry Nietzsche heard. Even philosophers no longer wanted to conceive of new ideas, but preferred to study the thoughts of their ancestors. This historical sense has a paralyzing effect on present creation. Whoever, with every impulse that stirs within them, first seeks to determine what a similar impulse led to in the past, will find their powers flagging before they have acted. Imagine the extreme example: a person who possessed no power to forget at all, who was condemned to see a becoming everywhere. Such a person no longer believes in their own being, no longer believes in themselves, sees everything flowing apart into moving points, and loses themselves in this stream of becoming. All action requires forgetting, just as the life of all organic things requires not only light but also darkness. A person who wanted to feel only historically through and through would be like someone forced to refrain from sleeping, or an animal that was only to survive by rumination and ever-repeated rumination. History Part 1. Nietzsche is of the opinion that humans can only tolerate as much history as corresponds to the measure of their creative powers. The strong personality carries out its intentions, despite remembering the experiences of the past. Indeed, it may even find its strength reinforced precisely by the memory of these experiences. But the powers of the weak person are extinguished by the historical sense. To determine the degree, and thereby the limit, at which the past must be forgotten if it is not to become the gravedigger of the present, one would have to know precisely how great the plastic power of a human, a people, a culture is. I mean that power to grow uniquely from within itself, to transform and incorporate past and foreign elements. History 1. Nietzsche believes that history should only be cultivated to the extent that it is necessary for the health of an individual, a people, or a culture. What matters to him is to learn better how to practice history for the purpose of life. History 1. He grants man the right to pursue history in such a way that it promotes the impulses of a particular present as much as possible. From this point of view, he is an opponent of that view of history which seeks its salvation only in historical objectivity, which only wants to see and narrate how things actually happened in the past, which only seeks pure, inconsequential knowledge, or more precisely, the truth from which nothing comes. History per 6. Such a perspective can only spring from a weak personality whose emotions do not ebb and flow like the tide as it watches the stream of events pass by. Such a personality has become a reverberating passive, which by its resonance again acts upon other such passives, until finally the whole air of a time is filled with such softly buzzing and related echoes. History 6. But Nietzsche does not believe that such a weak personality can truly empathize with the forces that governed people in the past. Yet it seems to me that one hears, as it were, only the overtones of every original and historical main tone. The crude and powerful of the original can no longer be guessed from the spherically thin and sharp string sound. For the original tone mostly awakened deeds, distress, terrors. This one lulls us to sleep and makes us effeminate connoisseurs. It is as if the heroic symphony had been arranged for 2 flutes and intended for the use of dreaming opium smokers. History 6. Only he who lives powerfully in the present, who has strong instincts through which he can guess and infer the instincts of his ancestors, can truly understand the past. This person cares less about the factual than about what can be inferred from the facts. One could conceive of a historiography that contains not a drop of common empirical truth, and yet could lay claim to the predicate of objectivity in the highest degree. History per 6. The master of such historiography would be he who sought everywhere in historical persons and events that which lies behind the merely factual. But for this, he must lead a powerful life of his own, for instincts and drives can only be observed directly in one's own person. Only from the highest strength of the present may you interpret the past. Only in the strongest exertion of your noblest qualities will you guess what in the past is worthy of knowledge, preservation, and greatness. Like by like, otherwise you drag the past down to you. All history is written by the experienced and superior. Whoever has not experienced something greater and higher than all others will also not know how to interpret anything great and high from the past. History 6. In view of the increasing prevalence of the historical sense in the present, Nietzsche asserts that man must first of all learn to live, and only in the service of the life he has learned should he use history. History Prof. 10. Above all, he wants a doctrine of health for life, and history should only be pursued insofar as it is conducive to such a doctrine of health. What about the contemplation of history is life-affirming? Nietzsche poses this question in his History, and with it he already stands on the ground he identifies in the sentence from Beyond Good and Evil, cited on p9f39. The attitude that manifests in the bourgeois Philistine is particularly detrimental to the healthy development of one's unique personality. A Philistine is the antithesis of a person who finds satisfaction in the free expression of their talents. The Philistine will only allow this expression insofar as it corresponds to a certain average measure of human ability. As long as the Philistine stays within their boundaries, there is nothing to object to. Whoever wants to remain an average person must come to terms with that themselves. Among his contemporaries, Nietzsche found those who wanted to make their Philistine attitude the normal attitude for all people, who regarded their Philistinism as the only true humanity. To them, he counts Friedrich Strauss, the aesthetician Friedrich, Theodor Vischer, among others. Vischer, he believes, openly confessed his Philistine creed in a speech he gave in memory of Hölderlin. He sees it in the words, "He, Hölderlin, was one of the unarmed souls. He was the Werther of Greece, hopelessly in love. It was a life full of softness and longing, but also strength and content in his life, fullness and life in his style, which here and there even reminded one of Aeschylus. Only his spirit had too little of the hard. He lacked humor as a weapon. He could not bear that one is not yet a barbarian if one is a Philistine." David Strauss, Book 2. The Philistine does not outright deny outstanding people the right to exist, but he believes they will perish in reality if they do not know how to come to terms with the institutions that the average person has created according to their needs. These institutions are, after all, the only thing that is real, that is rational, and even the great person must conform to them. From this Philistine attitude, David Strauss wrote his book, The Old and the New Faith. The first of Nietzsche's untimely meditations. David Strauss, the confessor and writer, 1873, is directed against this book, or rather against the attitude expressed in it. The impression of recent scientific achievements on the Philistine is such that he says, the Christian outlook on an immortal, heavenly life, along with the other consolations of the Christian religion, has irretrievably fallen. David Strauss, Book 4. He wants to arrange life on earth comfortably, according to the ideas of natural science, i.e., as comfortably as it suits the Philistine. Now the Philistine shows how one can be happy and content, even though one knows that no higher spirit rules over the stars, but rigid, emotionless forces of nature govern all world events. During the last few years, we have taken a lively part in the great national war and the establishment of the German state, and we find ourselves deeply uplifted by this unexpected and glorious turn of events for our much-tried nation. We assist in understanding these things through historical studies, which are now made easy even for the non-scholar by means of a series of attractively and popularly written historical works. At the same time, we seek to expand our knowledge of nature, for which there is also no lack of easily understandable aids. And finally, in the writings of our great poets, in the performances of the works of our great musicians, we find an inspiration for mind and soul, for imagination and humor, that leaves nothing to be desired. Thus we live, thus we walk happily. Strauss, The Old and New Faith, 88. It is the gospel of the most trivial enjoyment of life that speaks from these words. Everything that goes beyond the trivial, the Philistine calls unhealthy. Strauss says of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony that it is only popular among those for whom the Baroque is considered genius, the formless sublime, the Old and New Faith, Beck 109. Of Schopenhauer, the Messiah of Philistinism proclaims that one should not waste reasons, but at most only words and jokes, on such an unhealthy and unprofitable philosophy as Schopenhauer's. David Strauss 6. The Philistine calls only that healthy which corresponds to average education. Strauss posits the moral imperative. All moral action is the self-determination of the individual, according to the idea of the species. The Old and New Faith, 74. Nietzsche responds, translated into something clear and tangible, this merely means, live as a human being and not as an ape or a seal. This imperative is unfortunately utterly useless and impotent, because the most diverse things are yoked together under the concept of human, e.g., the Patagonian and Magister Strauss, and because no one would dare to say with equal right, live as a Patagonian, and live as Magister Strauss, Dav Strauss, per 7. It is an ideal, and indeed an ideal of the most wretched kind, that Strauss wants to set before humanity. And Nietzsche protests against it. He protests because a lively instinct within him cries out, do not live like Magister Strauss, but live as is fitting for you. 40. Only in the work, Human, All Too Human, 1878, does Nietzsche appear free from the influence of Schopenhauer's way of thinking. He has given up searching for supernatural causes for natural events. He strives for natural explanations. He now views all human life as a kind of natural occurrence. In man, he sees the highest product of nature. One lives ultimately among people and with oneself as in nature, without praise, reproaches, fervent zeal, delighting in much as in a spectacle one previously only feared. One would be rid of emphasis and would no longer feel the goading thought that one is not merely nature or more than nature. A person from whom the usual fetters of life have fallen away to such an extent that he lives on only to understand ever better, must be able to renounce, without envy or vexation, everything or almost everything that is of value to other people. For him, that free, fearless hovering above people, customs, laws, and the traditional estimations of things must suffice as the most desirable state. Human, All Too Human on 84. Nietzsche has already given up all belief in ideals. He now sees in human actions only the consequences of natural causes, and in understanding these causes, he finds his satisfaction. He finds that one gets an incorrect idea of things if one only sees what is illuminated by the light of idealistic knowledge. One then misses what lies in the shadow of things. Nietzsche now wants to learn not only the sunny side, but also the shadowy side of things. From this endeavor emerged the work, The Wanderer and His Shadow, 1879. In this book, he wants to grasp the phenomena of life from all sides. He has become a philosopher of reality in the best sense of the word. In Dawn, 1881, he describes the moral process in human development as a natural phenomenon. Already in this work, he shows that there is no supernatural moral world order, no eternal laws of good and evil, and that all morality has arisen from the natural drives and instincts inherent in human beings. Now the path was cleared for Nietzsche's original journey. If no superhuman power can impose a binding obligation on man, then he is entitled to let his own creativity unfold freely. This insight is the leitmotif of The Gay Science, 1882. No longer are any shackles placed on this free knowledge of Nietzsche. He feels called to create new values, having recognized the origin of the old ones and found that they are only human, not divine values. He now dares to reject what contradicts his instincts, and to replace it with something that is in accordance with his drives. We new ones, nameless, misunderstood, we premature births of a still unproven future. We also need a new means for a new purpose, namely a new health, one stronger, shrewder, tougher, bolder, more troublesome than all previous healths. Whoever's soul thirsts to have experienced the entire scope of previous values and desirabilities and to have circumnavigated all the arts of this ideal Mediterranean, whoever wants to know from the adventures of their own experiences what it feels like to be a conqueror and discoverer of the ideal, that person needs one thing above all, great health. And now, after we have been on our way for so long, we Argonauts of the ideal, perhaps more courageous than wise, it seems to us that, as a reward, we have an as yet undiscovered land before us. How could we, after such prospects and with such a hunger in conscience and knowledge, still be content with present-day man? The Gay Science 2, 41. From the mood characterized in the preceding sentences, Nietzsche's image of the overman emerged. It is the antithesis of contemporary man. Above all, it is the antithesis of the Christian. In Christianity, opposition to the cultivation of strong life has become religion. Antichrist, 5. The founder of this religion taught that what is valued by men is contemptible before God. In the kingdom of God, the Christian wants to find everything realized that appears imperfect to him on earth. Christianity is the religion that seeks to relieve man of all concern for earthly life. It is the religion of the weak, who readily accept the command, "Do not resist evil and endure all hardship," because they are not strong enough to resist. The Christian has no appreciation for the noble personality that seeks to draw strength from its own reality. He believes that a focus on the human realm spoils one's vision for the divine realm. Even the more advanced Christians, who no longer believe that they will rise again in their bodily form at the end of days, to be either welcomed into paradise or cast into hell, dream of divine providence, of a supersensible order of things. They too are of the opinion that man must rise above his purely earthly goals and integrate into an ideal realm. They believe that life has a purely spiritual background, and that it only thereby acquires value. Christianity does not seek to cultivate the instincts for health, beauty, growth, flourishing, permanence, for the accumulation of strength, but rather hatred against the spirit, against pride, courage, nobility, against self-confidence and freedom of spirit, hatred against the joys of the sensual world, against the joy and serenity of the reality in which man lives. Antichrist, paragraph 21. Christianity explicitly labels the natural as reprehensible. In the Christian God, an otherworldly being, i.e., a nothing, is deified. The will to nothingness is sanctified. Antichrist 18. That is why Nietzsche combats Christianity in the first book of his Revaluation of All Values, and in the second and third books, he also intended to combat the philosophy and morality of the weak, who only delight in the role of dependence. Because the type of man Nietzsche wishes to see cultivated does not undervalue this earthly life, but rather embraces this life with love and esteems it too highly to believe that it should only be lived once. He is therefore ardent for eternity, Zarathustra, Part 3, The Seven Seals, and wishes that this life could be lived infinitely often. Nietzsche has his Zarathustra be the teacher of eternal recurrence. Behold, we know that all things eternally return, and we ourselves with them, and that we have already been here an eternal number of times, and all things with us. Zarath, Part 3, The Convalescent. To have a definite opinion about which idea Nietzsche associated with the words eternal recurrence seems to me impossible at present. One will only be able to say more precisely when Nietzsche's notes for the unfinished parts of his Will to Power are available in the second section of the complete edition of his works. Pyrrhische Hofbuchdruckerei, Stefan Geibel & Co. in Altenburg, published by Emil Felber in Weimar, Outlines of a Modern Worldview by Dr. Rudolf Steiner, 4 marks, beautifully bound 5 marks. From the numerous judgments on this undeniably highly significant work, only a few are worth mentioning. Clear and true. I would like to write on the title page of the book. The presentation is clear, concise, and free from all pedantry. The author's viewpoint is true and sound. Only on such a worldview can the sorely threatened personal and human freedom find natural recognition, and the genuine right of individualism create a healthy collectivism. The author has written his work at just the right time. May it find the widest possible dissemination. Deutsche Worte Deck, Heft 1893, ed. Aug. Schroeder. If this book comes into the reader's hands, they should not be deterred by the fact that the title speaks of philosophy, which, according to common opinion, only occupies impractical brooding minds, nor by freedom, which in our days has greatly faded before the splendor of necessity and authority. The book truly delivers what it further promises: the outlines of a modern worldview, with a wealth of stimulating expositions and gripping ideas. In addition, it also provides important critical illuminations of prevailing systems such as those of Kant, Schopenhauer, Hartmann, and materialism is relegated to the junk room just as much as ideological idealism. Everything is freshly written, kept understandable, an intellectual pleasure and stimulating for every thinking person. and for that reason the work is recommended to all whose thinking can be satisfied neither by comfortable mysticism nor by barren materialism. Zeitung of Sunday, July 8, 1894. By the same author, previously published, Truth and Science. Price, 1 mark. The present work is a significant achievement. It fills a large gap in philosophy. The investigation into the essence of free self-determination has been reserved by Rudolf Steiner for the philosophy of freedom, which we anticipate with understandable excitement. Blätter für Literatur, Unterhaltung, Soap Bubbles, Modern Fairy Tales by Kurt Laswitz. Second, enlarged edition. Elegantly soft cover 3.5 dm, finely bound 4.5 dm. The book is one of the most interesting works to have appeared in a long time. These are not fairy tales in the usual sense, nor are they intended for children, as they almost all presuppose a certain scientific education. One could call them scientific fairy tales, for they are built upon scientific principles, follow scientific hypotheses in their details, or expand existing nature in imaginative and fantastic ways. The author combines natural science and his lively imagination so closely, and he knows how to create such charming images from them that no other book can be compared to it in its unique character. Fairy tales like On the Soap Bubble, Apoikis, From the Diary of an Ant, are stories whose charm no one can escape. No less captivating are a whole series of the other pieces in the book. Unfortunately, it is not possible to go into the content of these fairy tales individually, as it would be too extensive here. It should also be mentioned that certain satirical spotlights on this or that scientific question significantly increase the book's appeal. How much the splendid work is appreciated by the public is shown by the fact that it has already seen a second edition in the short time since its publication. The Soap Bubbles will be an adornment on every Christmas table. Dresdner Anzeiger, 1894, number 352. The deepest and most peculiar of these fairy tales are, in our opinion, the Soap Bubbles, modern fairy tales by Kurt Laswitz, which are available in a second enlarged edition. Their author does not lead us into moonlit, sunken magic castles of the past. No, he boldly ventures into the still-closed, misty lands of the future, and with scientific earnestness, pursues the paths that science of our day has taken. With wonderful ingenuity, he solves the most difficult problems and makes the most far-reaching inventions, which only ever lack some insignificant trifle to be realized. The apparatus and instruments are unfortunately always ready. The author does not deem it necessary to explain how they came into being. What a pity! We cannot go into detail about each individual fairy tale here, as tempting as it would be, but we do not want to miss the opportunity to warmly draw our readers' attention to these creations of a sharp and satirical mind, who combines an incorruptible intellect with a rich imagination, a warm heart, and high moral pathos. Pieces like Apoikis and the Diary of an Ant, but above all the profound Droplet, are not often found in today's literature. Even hinting at the content of these fairy tales is not possible due to their unique nature. They must be read. We hope that many will read them. Norddeutsche Allgemeine Zeitung, 1894, number 586. Recently published in its second, greatly expanded edition, and now available in over 6,000 copies, the pictorial embellishment of the German language in thousands of popular idioms, explained by origin and meaning by Dr. Hermann Schrader. 6 marks, beautifully bound 7 marks. From hundreds of consistently brilliant reviews, only the following should be highlighted. F. Avenarius in Kunstwort. The work deserves a similar circulation to Buchmann's Winged Words. Indeed, it perhaps deserves it even more. Der Westen, Chicago, 1889, number 38, a most meritorious work. It is a work that everyone who wants to thoroughly learn their language should acquire. A. H. Knopf in Lyra, 14.1. Thousands upon thousands of new writings and books appear annually in the German book trade, and how few of them are even a thousandth as justified in their existence as the one advertised. Rarely has a work so refreshed and satisfied me as this one. An entire grand wonder garden of our language, of our folk feeling, opens up before us with this guide. Ovi Leixner in Deutsche Romanzeitung, 1889, number 39. The author presents the instructive material in such a fresh, entertaining way that no one will surely be bored while reading it. The work deserves to become a household book in German families. We once again urgently recommend it to our readers. Quellwasser fürs Deutsche Haus, 1917. This is an unusually clever, lovable, and at the same time outstandingly national book. Grenzboten, 3/7/1891. We are dealing here with such a thoroughly amiable book that we would wish it the widest possible distribution. Thus, the work has become an entertainment book in the best sense of the word. But we would especially like to draw the attention of German teachers to the fact that it offers them a rich treasure trove for the needs of their lessons. Scores Family and Blatt, 1890, number 27. One of the most meritorious books. This book is highly recommended to all friends of our splendid mother tongue. Schwäbische Chronik of 1812-94, a book that should have a place in every German home. A detailed prospectus with samples and reviews is available upon request. Colophon, corrections. The following corrections have been applied to the text.